desarrollamos comunidad, información y libertad.
Y estamos listos ahora en el mediodía para aterrizar todos los conceptos de la mañana en el siguiente panel, que es enfocado en el VASP, el Virtual Asset Service Provider, las licencias, en cómo que podemos tener confianza como instituciones financieras y con instituciones financieras, facilitar activos, transferencias y custodia de activos virtuales. Tenemos dos panelistas en línea y vamos a empezar. No tenemos el completo ahora, desafortunadamente, para este panel, pero es bastante importante para tener el contexto de el siguiente paso en este país es empoderar las instituciones financieras para ofrecer servicios con cripto. Y en casi todos los otros países en el mundo tienen alguna manera de tener una licencia que muestra que es una plataforma o negocio sólido en lo que puedes ofrecer este tipo de servicios. Entonces, por favor, panelistas.
Muchas gracias, Tristan, and welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch, and we're gonna start with this panel, even though not everyone has arrived back to the room due to the lack of time that we have and the important subjects that we still need to adhere during this afternoon. So thank you, all of you, for being present in such a fast pace. Thank you. We're going to start by presenting our panelists on this next forum, where we're going to talk about how to define, determine, and how to choose who VASP actors should be, what we called in Bolivia, personas que proveen servicios de activos virtuales. A couple of months ago, when our regulators started approaching crypto regulation and crypto assets in Bolivia, this was a new term that was creating a lot of buzz among financial institutions and also private entities that were trying to get themselves involved in the crypto adoption in general in the country. So right now, we're going to give a little bit more thought on it. And we're going to ask our experts their opinions and their feedback on the experiences they've had with VASP actors in other country regulations. So first, John, I'm really glad to have you here with me. John is the CEO of Bank Social. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and give us a little brief about his expertise and background, because I can bet you can do it better than me in English. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here in La Paz today and meet with all of you wonderful people. Happy to share all the experience that we have and help craft simple and sensible guidance and legislation so that your people can move forward and innovate at the speed that they need to in order to have these accesses to fair and financial tools that we're seeing all over the world right now. My background, I've founded a bunch of companies. I'm a software developer by nature, so I inherently understand these systems at the most fundamental level. I like to consider myself a part-time legal scholar and very, very many other things. But at the end of the day, you know, my background started with crypto in early 2010 with Bitcoin, and I've really worked hand in hand with governments and financial institutions over the last 10 years to bring the first innovative tools that utilize these new systems in a way that is safe, sound, and keeps the pace with innovation, while also marrying that innovation with the guidance and with the regulatory posturing that creates a safer and more sound environment. And we're going to talk today about what that actually means in a practical sense of deploying that legislation, deploying the innovation in parallel so that neither one is holding the other back.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, John. And I would like to go now with Agustina.
Thank you. First,
Hi, Agustina. We're really glad to have
thank you. We are very glad to participate. So my name is Agustina Perez. I'm part of the legal team that is handling in Americas over the region. And first, to give a little bit of background, first of all, sorry, I would like to also thank the Science and Technological Committee of the Plurinacional Legislative Asamblea of Bolivia for giving us the opportunity to participate, and also to congratulate you all guys for doing this kind of initiatives. Binance, I'm here on behalf of Binance, that is one of the largest crypto asset exchanges in the world. We have over like 200 million users and presence in more than 100 countries. The company believes that the regulatory compliance and collaboration with institutions and regulators is a key actually for the user's safety and mass adoption. So we're really proud and thankful for being part of this event and being able to share our thoughts on how actually a regulatory scope should be built. And glad to also be collaborating with all the members of this panel.
Thank you very much, Agustina. We are really glad to have you here with us today. Agustina is here
Recording
today
in progress.
of Binance, a company which many of us know pretty well, as they are a really important actor in our crypto adoption as a country. So we're really glad to have you here today. Thanks for joining us. Next, we have also Mai Santa Maria, a person that I had the honor to meet a couple of days ago. She is currently the advisor of the Finance Department of Ireland on crypto matters. So Mai, we really appreciate you being here as well. I know that you are gonna give us great ideas, thoughts, and insights given your expertise. If you could please give us a little briefing on your background.
There we go. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up.
Yes,
Excellent.
Yes, we can. Hear you well.
Fantastic. Y muchas gracias a todos, y espero que después de comer no nos pongamos a dormir esta tarde, que el panel sea muy interesante para todos y con muchas ideas. So thank you, and thank you as well for the honor to invite me, because it's great and exciting knowing that I'm a little bit of grain of sand in this very historical moment for Bolivia, and particularly for the regulation of crypto assets. So very briefly, I have been working advising the Minister for Finance in Ireland for the last 8 years. I started looking at Bitcoin in 2017 as one of the things that would potentially definitely impact the economy. And here we are, it definitely has impacted. I'm actually a very boring financial accountant by trade, spent 20 years in financial services, actually working in finance, in banking, and in insurance. So I do bring in that private sector experience and regulatory experience to the table. I've also been a member of the Bureau of the Commission for Financial Markets at the OECD, who started looking at a regulatory framework across the world back in 2018. So in that role, I've been very lucky to definitely see a lot of regulatory frameworks being born and maturing over the years. And I hope I get to share some of those experiences with you all. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mai. We're really thankful for that greeting in Spanish. Thank you. And finally, but not least, we have Maha Al-Sadi, who is currently the Chief of Regulation Affairs of the Qatar Financial Center. And we're also really glad to have you here with us today, Maha, because as a Bolivian myself, and as a foreign member of the financial system, banking system in my country, I know that we can learn a lot from your expertise in Qatar and from the best practices that you have proven to work so far. So welcome, and we're really glad to have you here. I would like you to please give us a brief introduction on your background.
Thank you so much. Gracias for having me as well. It's a pleasure to be part of such an important event for Bolivia and to learn from everyone's expertise. I'm Maha Sadi, Head of Regulatory Affairs at Qatar Financial Center. However, I would like to say that the comments and the views that I'll be expressing today are my own and not necessarily that of my employer. I have been with Qatar Financial Center for the past year and a half. What makes our regulation very unique is that we are an onshore jurisdiction. So we are our own jurisdiction within the country of Qatar, and we're based on English common law. And our regulation focuses primarily on real-world asset tokenization. And we do not currently allow cryptocurrencies and stablecoins because this is something that we're still studying. So I guess we'll also be learning a lot from the Bolivian experience and be taking notes. Our framework is currently inspired by the Liechtenstein model, the TBTG model, because we find that they have properly captured the transferability of rights with the tokenization. Prior to working in Qatar, I used to work in Germany, where I was an expert of regulatory affairs at Deutsche Börse, the German stock exchange. And I looked into the implementation of MiCA and the DLT pilot regime. And that also gave me a lot of things that we would take as inspiration and a few rooms for improvement, where we need to really make sure that we do not over-regulate and do not regulate out of fear, but regulate out of necessity and consumer protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. So first of all, I would like to change the way we're leading this panel in comparison with the two previous ones. So I would like to actually ask a question to the audience right now. And I would like you to raise your hand if you heard or either understand completely what a VASP actor means. Or as we say in Bolivia, un PSAB, un proveedor de servicios de activos virtuales. If you either understand what they are, who they are, and how they are classified, please raise your hand right away. If not, don't worry, most of us don't. Okay, so I'm really glad to realize that we're all new in this world. So we're gonna have our panelists, first of all, explaining to us not only what a VASP is on the different regulations, because they're determined according to the regulations in different countries or regions, but also I would like to ask our panelists if you could define right from scratch who should be considered a VASP. What would you write down? Let's think you are a regulator of Bolivia. You are an official advisor of this country. What would you advise us on? John, would you like to begin with?
So, in America, we took a different approach, and we were the first to issue from a banking regulator out of the U.S. Guidance for banks. So instead of looking at it from the perspective of how do we spin up a new type of institution and a new type of regulatory framework, we took the simpler, more direct approach, which was go to the regulators and the banks at the same time and say, really, this is what you've been moving money. since banks have been invented. And really what we're talking about is an evolution of the systems to facilitate that. And they're not just crypto rails. There's AI built into this. It's an innovation platform. And so what we did in the US, one of the regulators that we work with a lot of times, he says there were no airplane crashes before there were airplanes. I don't know if any of you guys know that, but it took airplane before the first airplane crash. What that means though is that there are going to be some small mistakes made, but the bigger mistake is not moving on this. And I told the Bank of the UK, who became the Bank of England, who became one of the first to start issuing guidance back in 2021 and 2022 after our discussions, they understood the fact that they have to incorporate this into their ecosystems because there was no way for them to stop it, unfortunately. And that's the reality of where we live in, or the times we live in. And so with everything we look at, we always look at, sure, there's a big picture out here that we can go do a lot of things, but how do we start right now? How do we start with bold and simple moves that will not create burden? Because this is the challenge with anytime you create new regulations. You create burden on an already taxed existing system. It's the same problem in the US. The US, I guarantee you, is no different than any other regulators. These systems are stressed. And so what we did was we looked at it and said, this is really the same thing that banks and financial institutions, and you can go read the DLT guidance. Maybe we can send it to you guys to share. It was very simple. It was 3 pages that told banks and financial institutions in the United States, you guys are smart. You've been moving money for your entire existence. And so this is a new technology that we recommend you do your due diligence on. That's how it started. And now you're starting to see the next layers. After the first innovation waves came in and people started understanding how to utilize these systems, we're already talking with several banks here, both in Bolivia and kind of internationally in LATAM, to help bring these. The reason why you've never heard of us is because we white label into the bank's ecosystems. So we consider ourselves a third-party service provider. And that's really what the US did that set it apart to now you see how a lot of institutions are starting to flow back to the US. And so we believe that the approach where the banks and the regulators innovate at the same time with simple, bold moves is the best strategy to move forward. It's worked very successfully in the United States, which is a vastly complicated system, and it's working quite well in the United States with AML, BSA. We have institutions that are working on 30, 40-year-old financial software. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. So we do think that the path with banks, the path with regulators moving forward together with simple guidance and simple regulatory frameworks is the best path.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Just for all of our friends from abroad to understand how VASP have been, and please, we have lawyers here in the room, correct me if I'm mistaken, who know about crypto as well. Please let me know. We have defined in Bolivia PSAB, or persona que ofrece servicios de activos virtuales, as every individual who profits from the business of being involved with digital assets mainly. So we have still a broader, pretty broadened knowledge and concept of what a VASP should be and who they should be. Under this context, would you mind answering my question from the beginning? What, in your opinion, should be defined as a VASP?
Muy bien. ¿Les molesta si hablo en español un ratito?
Está perfecto, muchas gracias.
Es para darle un poco de descanso a los traductores, y entiendo también que el tópico es difícil porque es muy técnico. la pregunta es muy buena. Yo diría, o ese sería mi consejo, hay que empezar para definir lo que Bolivia entiende como qué es digital. ¿Es digital o es virtual? Eso para empezar. Tiene que definirse, ¿es un token o es un activo? Y si es una moneda. Hay muchas cosas que definir, porque esas son las cosas que los proveedores de servicios de activos virtuales van a vender y van a ofrecer servicios de eso. ¿Sigo?
Por favor. Sí, por favor.
Cecilia. Sí, vale. Entonces, para darte un ejemplo, y no puedo ver a la audiencia y lo siento, pero si tenéis una pregunta, se lo decís y me la van a pasar. Un ejemplo es Bermuda o Bermuda. En Bermuda, ellos la definición que dieron era que todo lo que sea en forma binaria es digital. O sea, todo si tiene un 1 y un 0, o sea, digital. Si está en forma binaria, es un activo digital. Todo. Tanto si es de pago, si es una inversión, si es de uso. Exactamente todo. En la Unión Europea no definieron el empiezo como activos digitales, sino que el modo el empiezo son las cryptocurrencies, las monedas de criptografía, y la definición de esa en el Marketing Crypto Assets, el MiCAR del europeo, en la definición pone exactamente, no que tiene que ser un activo de forma digital, de forma binaria, sino que tiene que ser de forma digital y especifica en tecnología blockchain. O sea, en Europa tiene que ser un activo digital, pero si no se utiliza una plataforma blockchain, en principio no es y no forma parte de la ley de activos de MiCAR. Otro caso tan diferente sería en Suiza. En Suiza tienen un sector financiero muy maduro. Hace muchos años que se conoce, con muchos participantes, y en vez de hacer o crear un sector financiero de activos digitales separado, lo hicieron de una forma que esté ya integrado en el sector financiero que existe en Suiza. Entonces, a tu pregunta, Cecilia, ¿cuál sería mi consejo? ¿Cuál es el punto que se empieza en Bolivia? ¿Qué hay a nivel de regulación? ¿Qué tenéis del servicio financiero? Segundo, ¿cómo vais a definir activos digitales, activos virtuales, activos en criptografía, monedas criptográficas? O sea, ¿cómo tiene que ser de grande? Porque entonces también depende, y va a depender cuál es el riesgo o lo que queréis al final de la legislación que queréis poner. ¿Queréis dar a base de ayudar al sector financiero para crecer? O sea, por ejemplo, que los proveedores de activos virtuales puedan ofrecer unos servicios a la gente en la calle que ahora no pueden ofrecer, o tenéis una meta final, tener un proyecto legislativo que sea muy claro a nivel de riesgo, por ejemplo. Entonces, os podrías enfocar más en todo lo que es la ley de lavado de dinero y financiamiento del terrorismo, que, por ejemplo, es lo que se ha hecho más en Bermuda o en Suiza. Entonces, creo yo que hay dos puntos de empiezo. Uno es, hay que mirar lo que tenéis ya en Bolivia. ¿Queréis crecer en ello o queréis algo aparte? Y segundo, ¿cómo se va a definir? ¿Cómo queréis definir? ¿Cómo necesitáis definir si es un activo virtual, si es digital, si es cripto y si no lo es.
¿Aló? Muchísimas gracias, Mai, por esa introducción y ese resumen amplio de varias regiones. Maja, I would like to hear your insights, and I would like you to share your expertise on Qatar regulation. How do you define a VASP? And also, I would like to know, how would you recommend to define a VASP?
Thank you so much for the question. I think from my point of view, there was a lot of confusion when I started working on this topic in Qatar, because people will start using different terms to mean the same thing. Sometimes it will be referred to as virtual assets, sometimes digital assets, sometimes crypto assets. And then we need to look not only into the crypto or the definition, but also into the way that it's representing the underlying asset. Is it purely cryptocurrency that does not have, let's say, a real world asset representation? Is it a means of payment? Is it going to be seen as a transfer of value? Or is it a stable coin that is backed or pegged by a specific currency or a basket of assets? So I felt like the first step that I had to work with the Qatari government is make sure that we need to know that we might have different words meaning the same thing. And that's when we had to look into it from a broader point of view. And my recommendation was to abide by international standard setting bodies. Here again, we would notice that there will be different classifications and different definitions. If you look into FATF, the Financial Action Task Force would refer to them as virtual asset service providers, and they would look at it purely from an anti-money laundering perspective, and therefore the definition of a VASP will be different than that of IOSCO that would look at it from a securities regulation. So I felt that was the first step, understanding what are we trying to regulate, which international standards are we trying to use. In Qatar, since, if I can say sadly, cryptocurrencies are still seen as excluded tokens. We define them by tokens and token service providers. Again, a different terminology meaning the same thing. But we decided to distinguish between two sets of token service providers. And we would say if there's a token service provider that is providing the validation and the token generation as a purely technical service, to serve, let's say, in the case of a utility token, or in the case of something that would not exist outside of a network, then these activities should not be regulated. They're purely tech services. Similar to, I don't know, you could be a virtual asset service provider providing analytics for anti-money laundering. This should not be regulated in the same way as financial services. Where we drew the line is you must be regulated, first, registered from an anti-money laundering point of view. So all anti-money laundering rules and regulations, including travel rule, would apply. Second, the moment that you're dealing with someone's money, or as we call it, holding clients' money, specifically in terms of custody and exchange, these are definitely going to be regulated activities that would require you to get not only a registration, but also an authorization from the relevant regulator, be it our regulated Qatar Financial Center Regulatory Authority or Qatar Central Bank. So I felt like this was the first differentiator. In terms of how we classified VASPs, we decided that we would keep them pretty simple. It's validation. Those who would generate a token representing a value. Then the custody service, and again, the custody service, if you're providing pure custody technical solution, you should not fall under full regulation. However, the moment that the custody is also holding the private keys and holding the asset, then you're definitely regulated just like you do with a traditional financial service provider. The exchange services is extremely important. And then we have the token transfer requirements. So this was the Qatari approach, which again was more or less inspired by the Liechtenstein approach. We decided to keep our token classification extremely simple by just saying that we will have two classes, permitted token and excluded tokens. And permitted tokens will be anything that has a real value, whereas an excluded token will be something that is purely based on speculation and does not provide any real value or means of exchange.
Hello, hello. Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank you so much.
Maja, sorry. And Agustina, you've been part of an entity, an organization that has presence in different regions of the world that works in different economies. I would like to know, in your opinion, what would the best requirements should be to consider an actor as a VASP?
So as my colleagues already mentioned, there has been a lot of differences between jurisdictions and even regions. Luckily, in Latin America, there is already regulation for BCABs or VASP. I think that it's always better to act with Monday's newspaper, let's say, and we can also learn from the successful operations and also from the maybe mistakes or learnings that the jurisdiction had. So in this case, I believe that when we are talking about BCABs in Spanish or VASP in English, we are talking about exchanges services. Those are like platforms that facilitates transactions between virtual assets and fiat currencies. Sometimes there are also fiat ramps. That means that it is the channels that you have to access cryptocurrencies from your local currency. When we talk about virtual assets, it is pretty difficult for many jurisdictions to actually reach out a definition that doesn't need to be changed in a time basis perspective. So most of the actually regulatory scopes, they didn't go to actually, at least now, let's say talking about this year and last year, they are not actually trying to get a definition if the virtual asset is regulated as security or is regulated some other another substance. But they are getting more like in all those tokens that are having a backend in blockchain, and they are not regulating virtual assets. They are regulating the platforms that are exchanging and facilitating services with those virtual assets. So they are operating, they are like just regulating, the players. They are not regulating the industry. So they are also mentioning everything related to custody and administration, transfer services, financial services, we spoke, but they are in a first stage of regulation. So when we talk about this, I'm trying to send the message that it is very important that the government understands what they are dealing with. And sometimes to generate that education and that understanding, it means that it should be advisable to not put a really strong and complete regulation, but to do it by step. So for instance, a lot of regulatory regimes, what they did is first of all to create a registration. So in this registration, they allowed, for instance, local entities or local players, foreign entities or foreign players to get into the registration and start conversation with a really, really small scope of regulation. Why this is very useful and beneficial? It is because it gives the government an opportunity to first start conversation with those players and understand how the industry is working in your jurisdiction. For instance, the volume of operations that you have. Compare the volumes of operation with other jurisdictions. Understand a little bit how does it work internationally, because we are talking about a tool or a technology aspect that works internationally. So it is really hard to believe that a blockchain technology can be local. When you're talking about like nodes, when you're talking about international public blockchains. So in this case, to talk about localization, it is sometimes something that is really hard to actually try to do. It doesn't reflect the economical and industry activity or is the real one. So in this case, what I would just mention is that I share the thoughts of everything that has been mentioned here. However, I believe that when you're starting a regulatory process, I think that sometimes less is more, because at least it gives you the chance to understand what you're talking about, to understand how it works. And maybe after that, you always have the opportunity to adjust or to request additional paperwork, processes, or anything like that. So I just wanted to add that perspective that I think it is really important for today's topic.
I wanted to add one thing there, just to clarifying. I think what you heard up here was a lot of different words that probably don't mean a lot to you. And look at what just happened in the United States a few weeks ago. The word stablecoin, everybody's probably heard stablecoin. You're not going to hear that word in the United States too much anymore after the Genius Act passes. And it's not because stablecoin is the wrong word, but it's because these words, these definitions are changing all the time. So I would encourage you guys to create a lightweight. When we say regulatory, there's a difference between creating a law that is very hard to change, and for the regulator, go sit down and create a very simple guidance for your regulated financial institutions that are already regulated, right? A very simple letter that lays a very simple framework for how to get started. And then, as everybody said here, you can learn, you can adjust from there. But what we learned in the United States is that when you, and really we learned this from other places, and we did it this way in the United States for this reason, passing laws fast and using words like stable coins that are changing, and using words like token that are meaning something different every day, put these governments in a position where they were, I would say that you guys have done a great job at looking at the landscape and now coming to the table to create sensible, simple guidance that your regulated financial institutions can jump into right now. So just the importance of holding off on laws right now and coming up with guidance, simple guidance that allows your regulated financial institutions to find third parties, just like they would find a third party for an Oracle database or a Microsoft platform that they would deploy. Creating an environment with simple guidance allows your regulated financial institutions to innovate with you as the regulator by their side.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for that sum up, because as we are learning, most of us today, not only what a VASP is, but what it could be, depending on where on the planet you are sitting at, we have to understand that we have a huge opportunity as Bolivians, because we're witnessing a process where this is going to be defined. And this process of definition, who should be regulated, which type of operation should go under regulation, which players and different actors from on and off the financial system should be included in this new line of regulation, is really important to decide how the crypto development is going to work in our country in the next years. And this panel was so important for us as the organization of the event, because we've already listening what had happened before in the US. Mai explained it beautifully with the perspective she has from different countries in the world. Maha gave us amazing ideas and definitions, new definitions, especially, at least for me, on what's happening in Asia, in Qatar. What we need to be talking about is not only how we define every single actor and every single detail of this new regulation, but how we would like to have this new crypto agenda and crypto development to push and improve the development and the adoption of crypto assets and digital assets in general. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for that those major insights on what's happening around the globe. And I have another question for you, which is a little bit more defined question about regulation itself, and it comes from the audience from this morning. I think it's really important that we answer this question right now, given what we have just learned about VASP together. The question goes, would implementing a regulation would actually stop the development of adoption in the crypto world? Because right now, many of us are thinking of crypto assets and digital assets as a solution to many problems that we're facing as a country. So regulation, definitions, how light or how deep we go and dive into the creation of these new rules and laws would actually stop the development and would prevent us from reaching a real solution to the problem we have, which is financial and economic.
I would say that anything done in a silo by itself stifles innovation. And what I mean by that is when you look around the world at how governments have moved, we've seen really great moves and we've seen really stifling moves. Banks like the Royal Bank of India made a really stifling move, shutting things down for several years. They've now come back around. I think the difference in where we see success and where we see failure is unilateral moves by either side. When the regulators go and make the regulations without involving the banks, we see failure. When the banks go and circumvent regulatory processes and leapfrog regulatory processes, we see challenges, we see issues, we see lack of understanding maybe, not from the people implementing, but from the people that need to pull these systems forward together. So I think that regulation, guidance, law, done without the stakeholders who are the ones implementing, the banks, the financial institutions, the bolsas, the exchanges, these are partners. We've seen the most success when we pair the private and public together to create guidance that they can follow. That's the other part of this. Sometimes the regulation becomes too overbearing, too burdensome on the financial institutions. They can't do it. So I think doing it together, doing it in tandem, and starting with your existing financial institutions, as opposed to trying to make a whole new financial regulatory framework, is the best way, the simplest way to start, because it's done from an existing framework with existing participants, with existing relationships that are strong, that have been working for years and decades. However many flaws they can have, every system has flaws. That's why we're here talking, to create more resilience, to create more inclusivity in these systems. But done in a silo, we know that these moves do not go very well. Where we've seen them go well is in the public-private participation together with the already regulated financial institutions.
Thank you, John. I have a following question, following that line of thought for Agustina. And I would like to ask you, what would the requirements would be for an entity as Binance to be able to continue to do business in Bolivia? Because currently this exchange is one of the main actors in the crypto adoption ecosystem. And what do you think would be the requirements for Binance as an exchange and as an international company to continue to do business, but in a safely manner?
Thank you, Isabel. First of all, I wanted to add something that maybe is a little bit from what John just mentioned, but I strongly believe that, for example, you shouldn't take, I'm going to give an example. So you shouldn't take an electric car to a workshop that handles combustion engine vehicles because they operate differently. So I understand that sometimes the relationship with financial institutions seems accurate. However, most of the jurisdictions in LATAM, they are creating an own ecosystem for cryptocurrency that could be related to banks or financial institutions, but the registration is being done directly with BASP companies. So one of the things that it is really important, at least for international players to be part of the ecosystem, is first to understand, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, is that blockchain is a technology that doesn't operate locally. For instance, Binance operates internationally, and they have a regional section for Latin America. In our case, we were the first company to handle, for instance, the 2 licenses in El Salvador for Bitcoin service provider and also for the digital asset service provider. That entity is operating in some of the LATAM jurisdictions. For example, in Argentina, we apply for the BASP registration with the El Salvador entity because this is the one operating. Argentina allowed us to do the registration with a foreign entity. That means that the El Salvadorian entity was the one doing the registration, that didn't need to have any kind of like local representation in the first step. That gave the Argentinian government a lot of insight on how the industry works. That registration has more than 100 entities now that has been part of the registration, and almost all international players applied to that jurisdiction with foreign entities that represents actually how their businesses is working. So this means that it is not just that you could do the registration with a foreign entity, but also you can do the reportings with a foreign entity. And that means that the locals FIU, the locals UIF, it will be in Spanish, they adapt their system to allow foreign entities to do the registrations and to be an obligated entity on their behalf, presenting STR reports, being able to be a reporting agency for lavado de dinero or ML purposes. And they adapt everything to actually reflect the reality on how international players are operating. When you do things this way, and also, for example, they also regulated everything regarding reverse solicitation basis. This means when you do not have something that is properly done for that jurisdiction, but you are actually operating broadly. They also allow that, and they also allowed and regulated entities that are not part of the registration and that can operate a little bit different. It is similar to what India also did, that they also allowed to have these kind of registrations with foreign entities. So it is something that is being applied in a lot of jurisdictions right now. And in this case, you are enabling them to reflect their operations of the reality of their operations, but also having the reports and everything you need locally that are going to be, for instance, we have a public proof of reserve. So you can know actually the warranties that the company is handling. This means that you can see the capital that the company has and where are the assets. We have a 101 asset banking, and we also have a SAF fund, that is a secure asset fund for users. This has been established in July 2018. It is for emergency insurance. So in case that the company has any problems, we have more than $1 billion equivalent for any kind of emergency. And this is not on users' assets or anything like that. It is company assets to have it as a warranty or as a safety measure in case it is needed. So all those kind of operation reflects that most of international companies are trying to get this kind of requirements, but they are doing it not because it is something that they need to do from a regulatory perspective, but it is something that they are starting to apply because they need that it should be actually applied in the industry. It is for a goodwill, actually, that they are doing that. So I think that, for example, to allow companies that they already have an international license, that they already are presenting reports in different jurisdictions, it is also something to take into consideration because other jurisdictions are considering it. So I think that at least for international players, those kinds of regulations are sometimes, let's say, more friendly to adapt actually the operations that we have internationally. And I think that it should be also something to take into consideration. We saw jurisdictions that they just did a regulation for local entities. We saw jurisdictions that they did a regulation for local entities, but also for foreign ones. So I think that it's actually pretty good to see what the region is doing, what our neighbors are doing, because I believe it is at the end how the region is going to work.
Thank you very much, Agustina. Your broader approach, because of the different clients from different countries or regions that you have, is pretty similar to the perspective that I think Mai has, because she has worked and she had experience with regulators from different countries, even though they work close by in the same region. So I have one last question for you, Mai. Given your expertise on different countries, different mindsets, different type of people that you work with, do you think regulators should consider the experience, the expertise, the opinion of people who is actually using crypto assets and developing the crypto ecosystem inside of a country when they decide to regulate and define who a VASP should be? This question is coming from the audience as well.
Gracias, Cecilia. And thanks. I'll speak in English, if that's okay. Continue with the panel. 100%. I can't say it any louder. 100%. You need to have that. Just to put in context, Bermuda were pretty much the first jurisdiction to go through in 2018 with a clear regulatory perimeter for digital assets. It is no coincidence that David Burt, who is still the premier in Bermuda, has a degree in business and ICT, in technology. So it would almost be possible to, and I say that time and time again, you cannot regulate what you don't understand. So, John there talked about earlier on, tried to do an analogy about the plane, and I loved it because I keep saying this, when we had the first car did not have airbags and it didn't have brakes. So we could not regulate for brakes because we still did not know that the cars could crash. You cannot regulate what you don't understand. And it is very difficult, and I know it's not realistic to ask that regulators become developers or they become experts in technology. That's not the point. The point is you need to bring together to the table the developers, the business owners, the legal firms, the regulators. And again, this is not new. The perfect example of that, and I go back to my comments earlier on, it's Switzerland. Switzerland also in 2018, when they put their classification of tokens, at the same time, they had announced the creation, in English would be the CMTA. So that's the committee for, I'm trying to think, I've got it in Spanish here, but actually I'm trying to think about it in English. Effectively, the CMTA in Switzerland, and I'll give you the exact name later on, it's a non-for-profit organization made up of financial services companies, regulators, legal firms, startups, technical companies, banks, were coming together to decide what would be the best fit for purpose regulatory environment for crypto assets in Switzerland. So the regulators didn't go alone and try to come up with things that effectively are not fit for purpose. And I think that's something, Cecilia, if I may, I think it's very important as well. Is it regulation? Is it guidelines? At the end of the day, it will depend on what the country wants to achieve from a growth and from a risk perspective. You will not know if it's fit for purpose unless you involve the business that are dealing with those products day in and day out. And an example of that, if you want to know as to what not to do and what happens when you do not involve the people in the sector that they know what they're doing, actually look at MiCAR in the EU. You know, the EU, for example, is based, in a lot of cases, is a copy and paste of MiFID. That's 20 years old. 20 years old before even computers existed sometimes. And we talk about these wonderful transactions being settled on paper over 2 days. Cryptocurrencies now can be settled in seconds. This is what happens when you don't involve those people that understand right at the time of drafting. That would be my experience.
If I may add, I have one small comment.
you
I
very
fully
much.
agree with. If I may add just a very
to
minor.
add anything else to this last question?
Yes, based on what we have done in Qatar, we decided to actually open our regulation for public consultation. So we managed to sit with a lot of stakeholders, be it banks, be it individuals, high net worth individuals, law firms, and we had some sort of a public hearing first saying that we are about to issue regulations, tell us what your pain points, tell us what you want us to look into. Then we created in parallel a digital asset lab where we'll be looking into different use cases in a controlled environment. The result of the public hearing and the digital asset lab resulted in our digital asset framework. And then we gave them an additional year to look into the way that we want to modify it. So even after we published the laws, we decided that it's not set on stone. And then we wanted to look, what do we really need as new regulation and where could we adapt existing regulation that is familiar? So we only tweaked our anti-money laundering regulation, for example. We tweaked our company registration requirements, but we came up with 2 unique perspectives for investment tokens, which will be classified as security tokens, and we created a different one for other digital assets. So this was something where we managed to get all the stakeholders' involvement to make it a success and not just to be a regulation that will be sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maya and Maha. That was a brilliant explanation that helped us understand where we are standing at and what we should do in the near future. That first of all is help our regulators with our inputs and expertise and experiences, because we have many people here that is already been involved into the crypto adoption and into digital development. So I wanted to thank all of our panelists. Thank you, John. Thank you, Maha. Thank you, Mai. Thank you, Agostina, all of you for sharing your insights and your vast expertise on how to deal with regulation and how to help Bolivia define the fundamentals of what's going to build our future as an adopting economy in the crypto world. So thank you very much. And this goes aligned pretty well and tight with our next panel that my dear friend Ismael Franco is going to lead. Because now that we understand we have to go through a process that needs us sitting down on a table, defining many starting points for what we want to build with crypto assets in our near future. We're going to talk a little bit more about compliance norm, AML, KYC. So we have stated that we need to define different concepts in order to understand what a VASP is for us here in Bolivia. And afterwards, the next step is to define as well what these VASP actors should comply in order to be able to operate in the country. And for that next panel, please, let's welcome first Isma, the rest of our panelists, and thank you again, John. Thank you, Agustina, Mai, and Maha. Let's give it a
Thank
hand
you.
for all of them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Best of
Thank
luck
you
for the
very
rest
much,
of the day.
Cecilia, and all the great panelists that were here. I'm going to invite you actually to stay online because we want to know your thoughts also in compliance rules, KYC, AML, and asset reports. For this panel also are connected Tiburcio Sanz, which is a compliance executive at TaxBit, and Elsa Madrol, which is the CEO of Verify VASP, Verify VASP. Also, I would like to invite all of you to stay online because the questions that are coming here are really, really good and are concatenated or linked with the previous presentation. So I would like first to give you a little bit of context because the first question from the audience is related to what we know as GAFI is doing, which is the Financial Task for FATF. And we actually in Bolivia adopted the definition set up by FATF, GAFI or GAFILAT para Latinoamérica. And we adopted the definition not only for requirements of compliance made by the Financial Investigation Unit, that would be a common thing to do, to adopt an FATF standard to make requirements on KYC, on AML, but also we adopted the same definition in the regulatory decree, which came out recently, which we call the FinTech decree. And that's something very risky because then we set out in stone a definition of virtual asset provider that was meant to be broad in order to investigate crimes, not in order to regulate or to impose a license. So I would like to know your thoughts because the first question from the audience were, are we compliant with the GAFI standard, the FATF standards? Are we like following their orders or their guidelines? Or is it a design of the regulation adopting these broad concepts, something that is advisable to do in a country which is developing their ecosystem? So maybe if someone from the panel can kind of solve this question, I don't know if maybe Tiburcio or Elsa would like to give an opinion on that.
Yo puedo abrir si quieres. I can speak in Spanish or English, whatever you prefer.
Tiburcio, let's hear you in Spanish, please, because the audience
Buenísimo.
maybe very, very interested to know this question.
Buenísimo. Yo soy argentino, Tiburcio Sanz, hace 13 años que vivo en el Reino Unido y soy de Tucumán, así que Bolivia queda muy cerca de mi casa y pasé muchos veranos en La Paz. Tengo grandes recuerdos de Bolivia. Trabajando previamente en lo que sería FinTech, pagos electrónicos, billeteras virtuales, Electronic Money Institutions, fue cuando empezamos a ver la aceleración de la tecnología en contra de lo que sería el sistema bancario delegado, ¿no? Y un gran ejemplo es el Revolut, que tenemos nosotros acá en el Reino Unido, o Nubank en Brasil, Ualá en Argentina y otros. Y donde empezó a haber esa tensión entre qué es aceptado como una institución financiera y qué no. Y empezar a verlo esto del tema de medidas de antilavado, antifinanciamiento terrorista, etc. Hoy cuando estaba preparando yo para la llamada, investigué un poco cómo se encuentra Bolivia dentro del rank de FAFT y cómo aplicamos eso a la industria cripto, ¿no? Porque siguiendo el comentario que muy bien marcaba Agustina, no regular tanto de que te ahogue, pero también protegerte como país de no exponerte a de repente estar enviando o recibiendo fondos de una nación que está sancionada o que tiene relación a actividades terroristas, como podríamos decir, que se vio mucho acá en Europa. Un ejemplo claro de lo que pasó con la invasión de Rusia en Ucrania y las sanciones que sucedieron en Europa y cómo nosotros tuvimos que establecer protocolos de control en ese sentido.
Excelente, Tiburcio, gracias. Muchas gracias y bienvenido de nuevo, aunque virtualmente a Bolivia. Thank you very much for your answer. And yes, following up what Agustina said, it's very important not to just copy paste a definition which is meant to investigate and put it in the definition that is going to regulate the structure, the license, the compliance requirements in the broad sense from the financial authority. I don't know if Agustina is still there. If you're there, just give me a sign because we received a question for you also.
Yes, I'm here.
Many people are interested in this sense, which I know it's KYC, AML, but they were interested and we received a question about how Binance operate with corporations as user. I mean, persona jurídica, which is fictional. So if a bank or a corporation would like to comply with KYC, AML standards, or something like that through Binance, is there a specific procedure that you set out to handle these cases?
Yes, so at Binance, we have really evolved regarding MAL or requirements for Activos. It is something that has been a top priority for the company in the last couple of years, as you may all already know. And we are a little bit like leading the crypto industry efforts on those regards. We have over more like of 600, I think that is compliance professionals that are working already under Binance. And we have two kinds of procedures that you can do the onboarding. So you can do a KYC, that is when you are like a physical person doing the onboarding, and some requirements. Usually we try to comply with the local requirements of each jurisdictions, and we have requirements and documents that we request because we are an international company and because we need to present reportings maybe where we have the international license. So there are all those documents knowing, for instance, like what are your kind of operations, depending also on the volume of operations that you're having, or the amounts. So there are different things that you need to take into consideration for the documents that we are requesting. And for everything that is related, for instance, for personas jurídicas, we have the process that it would be the KYB. Y sería algo como conoce a tu empresa en vez de conoce a tu cliente, like know your company, know your business. And for those, we request also everything related to this like entity that is trying to operate. It could be a financial institution, it could be another kind of company, it could be a broker. We have many different players, and for each one of them, we request the corporate documents, for instance, but also to know a little bit more about their operations and to justify the amount. And there is a lot of traceability regarding the blockchain operations. So this is something that is really useful to know why and how those companies are operating. And I think that is also really useful to check for instance, our terms of condition and our TOUs over the website to know a little bit more how we operate for these kind of purposes and what are actually the information or requirements that we request for these kind of clients.
Excellent, Agustina. Thank you very much. So if many of the attendants that lead corporations or personas jurídicas are interested to know, they can then integrate, be users in the big exchange platforms such as Binance. I have a question for Elsa. I know that Elsa has a small presentation to give at the end of this panel. But first, I would like to know your thoughts on how you have seen this environment of KYC obligations, AML obligations, especially regarding travel rule and other mechanisms that small startup, for example, can install in order to be compliant with the law, but not incurring costs that are prohibitive or that may provide incentives to regulatory arbitrage or something like that?
Sure. First of all, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. It's a great honor. I speak a little Spanish, but after the native speakers, I'm very shy, so I'm not going to try. Thank you for the interpreter for helping me out. It is a significant problem, the issue of cost for smaller VASPs, but I think it needs to be taken into a broader context, which goes back to your first question, which is Bolivia FATF compliant as a result of adopting definitions? Full alignment with FATF recommendations really centers around some of there are 40 recommendations, recommendation 15, recommendation 16, there are a handful of others, but already full alignment to those is going to require, a licensing regime. Those small VASPs will have to get licensed in certain jurisdictions. I'm based in Europe. In Europe, a MiCA license is actually extraordinarily expensive in most jurisdictions. So it is going to alter the landscape. There are a number of travel rule solutions in the market, just as there are a number of KYC solutions in the market. One thing to note is that generally the rule of thumb is 80% of VASP's counterparties are made up by, 80% of VASP volumes are made up of probably their top 20 counterparties, probably even more than that, probably 90% of the volume. So already focusing on getting compliant with those counterparties is a step in the right direction and doesn't have to cost a fortune because it's not, hundreds, thousands of VASPs that you need to connect to.
Thank you, Elsa. Yes, so what we are sensing here in Bolivia is that the environment is going to be divided in two kinds of players, right? Global exchanges or many big banks or institutions that have the capital requirements, and some startups or fintech initiatives that may not have all the capital or money to understand and be compliant with regulations. Another question from the audience that maybe Tiburcio can address is maybe a comparative state of GAAP, principles on contabilidad, or IFRS rules. What would be your thoughts on the advances on reporting operations in the books of the companies? They are very interested to know. I know this is not a compliance question or KYC question, but they are really interested in knowing how to manage the crypto assets in their books.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting question, and that is also part of what we do at TaxBit. We do an accounting solution that we can allow you to harmonize your numbers and be able to comply with the international standards that you very well mentioned. And we also do the regulatory compliance side that ties along very well with what Elsa does at Verified VASP. What we would say is that this harmonization is key, because when we look at liquidity of your holdings, blockchain is an excellent tool to prove transparency. You can have that almost publicly. And if we see what happened, for example, with the Bybit hack and how Bybit reacted, that was a very smooth transition from a crisis. In that way, Bolivia should or would benefit from having those standardized, harmonized rules that Agustina was speaking about. Previously, in my previous firm working at Crystal, we were working very closely with the Senad in El Salvador, Comisión Nacional de Archivos Digitales. And that was an excellent case of that alignment in terms of rules that immediately started attracting those companies. In Europe, we can see, I would say, jurisdictional competition from different countries trying to attract new exchanges into those regulatory bodies. So, for example, Ireland is now doing a tender with the Central Bank of Ireland to attract more VASPs into the country. So going back to that point, I think that Bolivia would benefit from having a very clear way of reporting in terms of your accounting, in terms of your regulatory compliance, and aligning with what is available out there. Because if not, it becomes very gray, and in those spaces you can leave space for creativity.
Excellent. So I know that maybe you don't see all the attendees here, but there are representatives and CEOs and executive suite representatives from many financial institutions, financial associations, fintech initiatives, payment companies, and startups. So I think this is bringing a lot of clarity on how to structure the requirements and reporting of crypto assets. The main lesson that we are bringing is that there are a lot of regulators that have advanced in licensing requirements, and we do not have to descubrir la pólvora, como decimos.
Exacto.
And what we know is that since there are many approaches to the regulation, what would be, and this is an open question if anyone wants to respond, what would be the best mix if the local authority should require only foreign registration? Would it be money service businesses as in the United States, or would it be, for example, Latin American certifications, Bermuda certifications? What would be like the most advisable set of regulatory guidelines to comply for a small country like us, which has only a developing crypto economy currently?
In this case, I will maybe, we did some suggestions in the previous panel, but I think that we should, let's say, trust the region. So the region is trying to evolve, is trying to create their own ecosystem. Also, we mentioned, for instance, now there is a regulation in Argentina, there is a regulation in El Salvador. We having successful regulation, so why should we just be allowing, international licenses that are so far away when we have good ones around us? So I think that to accept foreign companies, it is also a way to accept that these are international operations. So I think that it is something that needs to be taken into consideration to have like a healthy ecosystem.
Thank you. Yes, what we are interested in is to build an environment that is welcoming for us to get into global operations instead of just preventing people to access to the market just in these economic conditions. Question for Tiburcio that also was made from the audience, and knowing that there's tax bit, is something about the taxation of crypto assets. I know that we are getting away from the topic KYC AML, but questions keep coming. So how would you recommend for a small developing country such as Bolivia to address the taxing question after a license or registration is made for crypto operators? Should we tax them with capital gains, for example, or just tax the fees on I don't know, a small VAT on the fee? What would be your first recommendation or approach in order to progressively knowing the economic terms of these operations?
Thank you. That's a really interesting question, and I don't want to overstep on my comments here or recommend something, but I would say that it should be a competitive tax regulation that makes it attractive for people to register in Bolivia. A great example, and I don't know if Maha is still there, is what happened in Dubai with VARA. VARA, the regulatory body, completely out of the blue. Now Dubai is one of the epicenters of crypto. Every time I go to Dubai, I see more and more companies moving from Europe to Dubai purely because there's easy access to capital markets, there's very low and very clear taxes, and there's a conjunction between public and private enterprises. So you have VARA having open consultations with these companies saying, how can we make it this to work very aligned with your needs and your strategies? So in terms of tax, a great example that I'm seeing right now is what's happening in Austria. Austria has a withholding tax that has, to be applied on every single user on capital gains and the different trades that they do per calendar year. It didn't stop people from continuing to register in Austria. I think that Bybit and KuCoin and OKX are announcing VASP licenses in Austria. But then we have to consider, well, Austria is a very well-established European country that works very closely with the German regulator as well and has become that kind of hub. Maybe Bolivia could take an approach that is more similar to El Salvador, that is an upcoming economy and wants to become a challenger into the other established
We
players.
shall look into Latin America. Thank you very much. Austria, India, Qatar are great examples as well. So what we are trying to do is engage in these conversations with the private sector here at the Cámara de Diputados, the Legislative Assembly. We try to engage on as many opinions that we can and gather civil society in order to have a constructive debate. So thank you very much. I would like Elsa to do the presentation that she has for us, and then we can close this panel, announcing that after the panel, there is going to be a break in the patio histórico of the Legislative Assembly. I thank you all for all your interventions, your consideration, your attendance, even virtually, is very, very bright, and it's very insightful for us. So thank you very much. Elsa, you have the floor, and then we are going to do some remarks afterwards.
Thank you so much. Mai, did you have one final comment?
Oh, you're very good, Elsa. If I may, actually, it's actually in relation to tax. With you. Sorry, can you say there? Yeah. I think Maha actually is in Qatar, but I'm sure she knows as well that Dubai are doing a very good job. What I'd like to say about tax is there's a big difference between tax, personal tax, and tax on companies. So in Ireland, we have a very low corporation tax rate of 12.5%. But because we defined an asset so well in 1997, now digital assets fall under a definition of an asset, and capital gain tax, it's at over 30%. So as you can see, transacting in crypto assets, digital assets, it's not very good from a personal perspective in Ireland. So I would say check your tax regulation in country, find out what the asset is, or at least how is the difference, or what would you tax differently for, not income tax, but this is obviously for disposal. Is it property? Some countries, I think, they've actually said that all transaction in cryptocurrencies will be similar to foreign exchange. Some countries are saying it's immovable property. We went through all that back in 2018 and 2019. I think it's key to find out not only the tax from a business perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because maybe Tiburcio, you probably have some experience as well. A lot of employees, particularly working in innovative fintech startups, companies like this, may actually like and would prefer to be paid.
Yeah, in crypto.
Not only
and then, we got the...
Exactly. So just think about this. That's all I wanted to say. Elsa, I'm looking forward to your presentation, and thanks for letting
Thanks, Mike, because this is actually a debate here in Bolivia about the nature of this asset and if it accrues capital gains or not for tax purposes. So actually, we have some overwhelming questions on KYC and other things that Tristan has been gathered from the audience. So I will leave the floor from him. I'm sorry, but we are going to delay the presentation for just 2 or 3 questions.
Conduct the presentation. The presentation will actually help guide us into the compliance for AML and KYC.
Okay, you want me to proceed with the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Are you able to see my screen? Yeah, I believe so. Okay. I'm going to, first of all, thank you very much once again. My name is Elsa Madrol. I'm General Manager of Verify VASP, a regulatory technology company specialized in travel rule compliance solutions for virtual asset service providers. I've been in the blockchain space for 7 years. I've been in the travel rule arena for 5 of those 7 years. And then before that, I was a banker for 15 years in the capital markets. So again, a thank you to the organizers for pulling together such an impressive event. So Verify VASP is a travel rule service provider, one of the largest ones in the world. We launched the company in 2022 to help VASPs meet new travel rule requirements as countries started to align with the FATF, the GAFI standards for virtual asset service providers. 3 years later, it's now 2025, we've exceeded 15 million verifications. We've grown both our product offerings and our global footprint. I completely echo Mai's comments on the need for public-private partnerships. It's absolutely critical. We hold travel rule working groups, bringing together public and private sector around the world for half a day to a full day, just for this very purpose. And if you can imagine, we can spend a whole day just talking about travel rule. So there are lots and lots of complexities to effective regulation. As it stands today, well, there are several ways of achieving travel rule compliance, but we're the only solution to offer what we call a verified network, which means that we've built an ecosystem made up of rigorously assessed member VASPs that you see here on this slide. Today, we have over 130 members.
We can see just the word. Yeah.
Sorry. Can you see it now? Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just move that so I can. Okay. Yeah. Just
We just see the words.
I'm sorry.
The talking points.
We see the full screen. We are not seeing just the presentation.
Okay.
I can see the notes, yeah.
Are you able to see it?
Yeah, but we see all your notes and not the slide.
You've got the full screen. Got it. My apologies. Okay. So we operate a verified network made up of these members. We have members active in over 30 countries, and that continues to grow. As you can see, it's early days in Latin America, but we are having conversations with entities in LATAM. And we have reached $300 billion of fully compliant travel rule asset transfers as of today. So the issue with travel rule regulation around the globe is that there are some significant differences because the FATF imposes standards, which are minimum standards. Each country has the ability to enhance those standards. And so a great example of that is what Europe has done with MiCA. In the EU, we've tried to establish what we call the gold standard of regulation, including the transfer of funds regulation for travel rule, which is quite intensive in terms of some additional requirements that perhaps the FATF didn't have. And so these are the different types of variations that you may see within within travel rule implementations. So the applicability of travel rule, the level of application, counterparty VASP due diligence. This is quite a major one. The definition of virtual assets, which we've talked about. What types of information is being required, whether a de minimis will be imposed. So that's a minimum requirement under which the travel rule does not apply. And then the treatment of unhosted wallets. In some countries, unhosted wallets are completely out of scope, which mirrors what FATF suggested. In other countries, they are in scope. So I wanted to talk about 5 regulatory checkpoints, which are really 5 areas of focus that we've seen regulators around the world look at, particularly in licensing situations, and also based on our experience where some of the challenges may come into play. So the first is counterparty VASP due diligence. The objective here is to make VASPs accountable for who they choose to have a business relationship with, so other VASPs that they choose to facilitate transfers for on behalf of their clients. The second checkpoint is verification of originator and beneficiary. The third is the idea of immediate and accurate transfer of information. The fourth is enhanced risk mitigation measure. And the fifth is protection of personal data. So in the first checkpoint, this concept of due diligence of the counterparty VASP, the whole purpose of the travel rule is to begin to make VASPs accountable for who they are permitting transfers to. When I say who, I don't mean the actual individual, I mean the counterparty. And I think there are a number of issues there that are trying to be resolved by the FATF with the travel rule, where entities posing as VASPs were facilitating transfers, and sometimes there weren't even VASPs at all, or they could be illicit VASPs, or they could be funding terrorism or money laundering operations. So this concept of counterparty due diligence is something that usually already exists in AML/CFT frameworks for traditional finance. It is now being brought into crypto and is part of what needs to be really reviewed by regulators and supervisors when looking at the ecosystem. Here we have a list of really questions that should be answered as part of that due diligence. The second regulatory checkpoint is the verification of declared beneficiary. So interestingly, in a travel rule exercise, there's the ordering VASP and there's the recipient VASP. Each VASP knows their clients very well and should have done adequate KYC on each of their clients. And so it's understood that the VASPs have to agree on a relationship of trust, but then trust the other side to have done the KYC correctly on their client, to have measures in place to be protecting the KYC, and then to agree to that exchange of personal information about the client and about the transfer. The problem happens not at the VASP level, but actually at the user level. So what FATF does not stipulate is that when the user declares the beneficiary, so a user could declare a beneficiary, they could put anything in there. It could be malicious, or it could be accidental, or it could be a scam. They could genuinely be thinking that they're sending crypto to Elon Musk. Let's say they put in Elon Musk as the beneficiary, the declared beneficiary. The problem with not verifying that declared beneficiary is that that name gets name screened. It has to be name screened as part of the travel rule. And if you name screen Elon Musk, he does not appear on any sanction lists, and it doesn't even raise a red flag. And so what could happen if the declared beneficiary is incorrect for whatever reason, and the name screen is a green flag, and the transfers come across, so we now have their virtual assets that have arrived with the beneficiary VASP. It's up to the beneficiary VASP to figure out that KYC match doesn't happen, but it may already be too late. The assets may have already been transferred. And so you have new levels of risk. You have potentially a compliance issue, potentially even a personal data privacy issue. And so it really is a best practice to verify the declared beneficiary as declared by the user, and not just verify it, but do so before the transaction, before the blockchain transaction. Now, the FATF is aware of this. There have now been 2 consultations, one last year, one this year, on potentially revising Recommendation 16 to take all of this into consideration. But it's something that we identified very early on as a major issue and absolutely a best practice that the industry needs to abide by. So this is where I summarize level 3 is where the FATF, that's the FATF minimum standard. We operate at level 4, which is where we can have, the verification of the name. It can stop assets from arriving and having to be frozen and having to be sent back. And it also enables enhanced risk mitigation measure, which I will touch upon in a little bit. So how do we do this exactly? Well, the originator VASP will collect the information from the user. and it will check with its own KYC that this all connects. The first call, it works through a system of API calls through our system. So the first call to the beneficiary VASP is, are you VASP B? Are you the declared the declared VASP? Yes, I am. The second call is, do these declared beneficiary details match what you have on your KYC records? So for example, I have Elon Musk as the declared beneficiary. Does Elon Musk in your KYC records really own this wallet? And if the answer is no, it's either give me better information, or no, it really doesn't, and my user isn't giving me additional information. Then the travel rule exercise stops there. We want to help VASPs avoid sending travel rule information randomly when that declared beneficiary hasn't been verified, because it's a massive red flag. If the declared beneficiary does verify, actually Elon Musk does own this wallet address according to our KYC records, then okay, the rest of the travel rule information can flow through. Everybody can name screen with accurate information. And then only then do we suggest that the blockchain transaction takes place. So that really clarifies the concepts of immediately and securely. Immediately, as defined by FATF, says at the same time or before, we're saying before. And then securely isn't just, of course, encrypted, on both sides and making sure that no one has access to the naked information. It's also part of the counterparty due diligence that we need to be doing on these counterparties. All of this, so the collection of information, the submission, and the verification needs to be as close to instant as possible. Of course, the confirmation on the blockchain can take several hours, but the idea from the GAFI is to ensure that anybody sanctioned on any sanction list or illicit actors are weeded out during this process and identified and the transaction stopped. The fourth regulatory checkpoint is enhanced risk mitigation measures. So this diagram is a little bit aspirational. This is what a regulated ecosystem should look like. At the center of this is the regulated VASP. The regulated VASP should be the only entity that still has access to fiat ramps back to the bank. It acts as a guardrail, which means that it will stop illicit actors from having access to transfers. It should also stop high-risk, unregulated VASPs. But the travel rule allows for potentially certain low-risk, unregulated VASPs to still have access to these regulated VASPs and therefore to the fiat ramp through counterparty due diligence, but also the demonstration of an enhanced risk mitigation measure. Now, they don't have a travel rule requirement in place because they're unregulated. And so there's no legal basis to be exchanging travel rule information, which is highly sensitive personal information. So the regulated VASP has to come up with an enhanced risk mitigation measure. And that's a regulatory checkpoint. Regulators are looking at, okay, what enhanced risk mitigation measure are you putting in place to continue these transactions with these unregulated VASPs? A common one that we see is limiting to first-party transfers. So same name, first party only. That actually makes up the large majority of use cases. If you think we have Binance on the call, a very common transfer would be me, transferring from my Coinbase wallet to perhaps a Binance wallet that I have offshore because Binance has more tokens on offer for trading than Coinbase does, for example. And then finally, the regulatory checkpoint number 5 is always maintaining, as I said, the legal basis to be handling personal data. So, in Europe, we have GDPR. There are privacy frameworks and data protection frameworks all over the world that we have to be extremely careful with. Each entity in this travel rule transaction, usually 2 VASPs and a travel rule service provider, has to be identified as a data processor or a data controller. It's very important to us that we remain, as service providers, data processors. We have less obligations. We have, to remain a data processor, we have to not ever have access to unencrypted personal information. And then, of course, the data controllers, who are the 2 VASPs, are going to have additional responsibilities And so they need to ensure that the personal data that they're going to be transferring is going to a counterparty that they trust. They need that user consent because they're going to be sharing personal data for each transaction. And then you need the contracts in place. You need the service agreements and the data protection contracts in place to protect all of this. So this means we have not one travel rule solution, but really three. One for VASPs to transmit data, travel rule obliged transactions with other travel rule obliged VASPs. One for VASPs to transfer to non-travel rule obliged VASPs that they've decided that they still want to transact with on a first party basis. And then we do have an unhosted or self-hosted wallet verification solution. As I said, in some countries, there is a requirement to also verify the ownership of a self-hosted wallet. We have been voluntarily audited by PwC on the FATF standards. We also have some cybersecurity audits in the form of SOC 2 levels 1 and 2. This is increasingly important. The FATF has highlighted time and time again that there are a number of solutions in the market that provide travel rule services, the mandatory exchange of personal information, that are falling short of the FATF standards. So as much as we can encourage the industry to get these voluntary audits to raise the bar a little bit, the easier it will be for the ecosystem, because if you are using one solution that is very accurate and your counterparty is maybe using a different solution, we're running into a lot of issues on these issues. What we do at the counterparty level is that we provide assistance with due diligence, because we do a lot of due diligence on our members when they join. We make that due diligence available to VASPs upon consent of the other VASP. And so that's actually a huge relief, because if you think of, especially a small VASP who now has to do in-depth due diligence on every single one of his counterparties, even if it's just 20, like I mentioned at the beginning, that's still an awful lot of due diligence. And then we also assist with verification of declared beneficiary. We assist with immediate and secure submission and verification. So all of 5 of those issues that I mentioned, we assist VASPs with. And finally, this is a very important metric for us, and we think something that regulators should be really focused on, and that is verification success rate and verification time. On average, we take less than half a second, and we achieve a 92% successful verification rate. Now, the reason that we are absolutely market leading for this, the reason we're able to achieve these levels of success is because we run this verified network. The concept of a verified network, this closed permissioned architecture where we do a lot of the due diligence on members, in our opinion, is the only way to achieve these rates. But also, in our opinion, the only way the travel rule can work is if you can get this as close to real time as possible and with such high verification rates. So with that, I think I'm well over my 15 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Elsa. In the interest of time, we're going to formally close this panel. We have a cultural show upstairs. There are bailarinas in the hallway upstairs. Bailarines, thank you. I'm trying. So anybody that wants to go upstairs to see the show, the cultural show, you are absolutely invited. Also, in the interest of time, I want to continue a little bit, given the wealth of knowledge that we have here on the panels, and I messaged some of the panelists that are willing to stay just a little bit longer and bring together some of my personal experience helping Latin American countries adopt and integrate cryptocurrency and some of the mind share that we have in the panels. So you're free to do both of them. In the particulars around AML and compliance and KYC, I'll start with example from my experience in El Salvador. I had the opportunity to be part of or to lead the technology implementation of the first ever national cryptocurrency wallet. That was very scary for the government, and it was very scary for the banks. And that was understandable because we did not have confidence in AML. And the first version of the product, which was done by someone else, did not have the right KYC requirements and compliance. So there were challenges, there were problems, very frankly, that were overcome by experience. That's why we are putting this panel together and bringing people who have spent years, if not decades, working on finding the right balance of innovation and financial opportunity and access and compliance to protect people. So as an example, in El Salvador, the banks were one of the critical parts of making the entire system work. It's a little bit different and a little bit similar to what Bolivia is looking at. Bolivia is looking at an integration of Boliviano, and today it's stablecoins, USDT, USDC. Of course, we can include Bitcoin and Ethereum and all of the others, and we should. But today, we're talking stablecoins. When banks are interacting with cryptocurrency, we need to have confidence that that cryptocurrency is kosher. It's clean, right? It's gone through the necessary AML requirements. And so I'm happy that Elsa took us through those processes that they offer as a service from Verify VASP, because they provide confidence to traditional, existent, today, banks, financial institutions, securities exchanges, bolsas de valores, fondos that want to interact with cryptocurrency and need to comply with FATF and need to comply with AML and OFAC so that their correspondent accounts in the US or Europe or Dubai stay open and are clean. It has already been done on a national scale. Thankfully, I did it. Well, at least I was part of one country that did that. And then similarly with Bancolombia, they didn't even have a regulatory regime under which the licensed entity did facilitate intercambio from crypto or digital assets to fiat assets in pesos colombianos. Here in Bolivia, it can be done by bringing best practices. AML is one part of the system. Another part, as an example, KYC. You have to know who your customers are. I know that Binance has, I've spoken with other people in Binance, and I don't know if Agustina is still on, but I know their interface and the process for onboarding customers, and they apply standards that require people to show who they are. When crypto, 10 years ago, if you sign up to an exchange, you put an email, that's it. And that's your KYC. That's not today. Today, there are standards so that somebody who uses Binance does KYC so that those details can be reported on, not to necessarily control people, but to protect people as a second part. And I'm happy to bring your comments into each, but I just want to go one by one as an overview. I'm very happy that TaxFit is on here because a tremendous challenge for the banks was accounting. How do we account the value of Bitcoin that is exchanging for dollars, not stablecoin, dollars in El Salvador, and here will be Bolivianos. So you go USDT Boliviano, but the exchange rate, the tasa, is going to change over time. So you have to have confidence in your accounting for the time of exchange, the amount of exchange, who did it, who is the counterpart, if it is from the bank as the counterpart, or the financial institution, or the bolsa de valores, or the fund, or if it's peer-to-peer. If we're going to help this environment in Bolivia grow, we should practice or learn from the accounting standards. One of the reasons I brought TaxBit is because they provide accounting for the IRS in the United States. for crypto. I think that's a pretty good standard to hold and to learn from. So I'll let each of you comment on these after. Actually, maybe I'll let you comment on them now. We'll start with AML. Elsa, I know that you just spoke, but in working with developing economies and VASPs, a VASP being an exchange that does comply with regulation, that wants to report. The exchange that I mentioned earlier today did not have all the compliance and reporting that Binance does, as an example. So we have higher confidence in Binance than we do with an exchange that does not report. I want to open up the floor now. Elsa, I know Maya is also on here.
The first thing I would say is that all of this, when you say Binance, we have to be careful because we are talking legal entity by legal entity in each jurisdiction. So Binance has a very global footprint with lots of different legal entities. And what may be, and not to pick on Binance, but what may be true in one legal entity may not be true in another. And we have seen cases where, you know, trading activity gets pushed from one legal entity to another to kind of chase jurisdictional arbitrage. So a small VASP is not necessarily at a disadvantage because, again, they're getting assessed legal entity by legal entity. Now, the choice of jurisdiction becomes very important. And that's where I think Bolivia has an advantage, right? You can become a jurisdiction of choice if you get the regulatory framework correct.
Yeah, I wanted to add
Great
something.
Agustin, I want you to comment on that because I know that Binance does operate globally. It's one of the widest spread exchanges in the world.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Tristan. So in this case, at least for what is in Latin America and what has been the experience of Binance in Latin America. So as I mentioned, we already have the 2 licenses from El Salvador. At that time, El Salvador was the first jurisdiction in the region that was more crypto-friendly and wanted to learn actually how the ecosystem worked. So that's why we applied for the 2 licenses. It has a really beneficial also tax regime that is publicly. And they have also a mass adoption regarding cryptocurrency. So, of course, it was one of the first choice and actually one of the first licenses that was released around here. After that, we did also the registration in Argentina. We did it with the Binance El Salvador entity. It is publicly, you can check the CNV website. CNV, CNV, la Comisión Nacional de Valores. It is the local regulator for Argentina. We present reports in Argentina. We are registered over the local FYU in Argentina also. And we also participate in the public consultation that they did for several matters regarding cryptocurrency. I think that, as it was mentioned also before, public consultation, it is actually a really good tool to take into consideration. And of course, Binance, it is an international company, and international companies, they operate pretty different than local companies. So usually the setup, it is more on a regional perspective. So what happens in LATAM can be pretty different from, for instance, what happens in Europe and what happens in other places. Because the regime is pretty different, because they require us to have different requirements. They require us to have different ways to structure our entities. So again, in this case, we're talking about Latin America. And in Latin America, we have set up the structures that way, the way that we already presented over different jurisdictions around. And in those reports and everything that we share with regulators, we already had auditors in El Salvador. We also have several exchanges in Argentina, and we present reports. We comply with MAL purposes also, and all the details, law enforcement requirements, and everything is also being complied, even if we do not have a local entity. So all those things needs to be taken into consideration, because sometimes I think that we push more for international exchanges than, for instance, or local ones. And sometimes we are providing more information than the other place. So I think, again, in this case, I understand. And I think that because Binance has been one of the oldest players in the industry, we had successful cases, and we also make some mistakes, and we learn from those mistakes that we made. And we also are pretty audited and after a lot of things that happen in other jurisdictions. And we dealt with everything in a very transparent way. And we have a lot of transparent information too that the user can access. For instance, as I mentioned before, the proof of reserve, the self-fund, and a lot of other tools that we implemented in these couple of years. And we are still working in new ones to bring this safety to the user and bring this safety to the industry. So I think that, again, I think that international players can bring a lot of opportunities, in this case to Bolivia. If Bolivia can take these positions to have a regulation that it is, let's say, it plays the attention of different companies internationally, I think that there is a really, really, really good opportunity to take that.
I love it. I really love it. Thank you, Agustina. I'll say one comment in support of creating the directional oversight that a regulator might want as they learn more about crypto service providers, VASPs. It fosters an environment of both oversight and protection, but not stifling the innovation. So in El Salvador, Binance was operating at the same time as the national wallet, at the same time as other startups, at the same time as other tools, and they have their own pricing and they have their own tech, but they have a guideline that protects the customer. That's the point here. That's the point of regulation, to protect people. I know I want to get Mai's thoughts on this, because Mai has her global perspective and expertise, and in particular, MiCA in Europe is, I believe, one of the most strict jurisdictions. Mai, can you bring some insight, Mai?
Here, can you hear me okay? Yes. Yeah, sorry, because I had to move.
Yes.
I mean, I've said that earlier on, but I just want to be clear that anything I say is my personal opinion, and I definitely do not represent my department of my ministry or my country in that. As this is a very, very personal opinion, and certainly opinion coming from experience. MiCA was probably the most comprehensive large piece of regulation. Certainly was an achievement when finally approved. However, I think it's important for those of you who are in Bolivia maybe to understand that MiCA was born out of a defensive need to protect the euro. And that, I think, is an imperative thing to understand. When you are writing and regulating to protect, you're not thinking of innovating. They're just very different approaches to the business. And I think this shows in MiCA. So if you compare, say, MiCA with Switzerland or Bermuda, as I mentioned earlier on, MiCA requires that if you are a global crypto asset service provider, you need to have everything within European walls. How does that work with a truly global cross-border technology? It's not particularly that conducive to supporting a global growth of a product. So if I look at, for example, what Switzerland did, in Europe, we had the VASPs, that's the fifth AML, as you know, and now we have CASPs. That's what the MiCA will be replacing the VASP at the end of the year. Switzerland did not go and create a separate VASP regime. You can operate within these SROs, these self-regulated, organizations, I think, self-regulating effectively. So that is very similar I'm guessing, to what you've experienced in Bolivia. You have companies operating and selling products to citizens, but they are doing it without the full requirements, whether it be capitals, reporting, and so forth, of regulated entities. They don't have to, but as long as they fall under the umbrella of us, there are certain minimum requirements for AML, like a must, and they have to have presence in the country. And that's enough for those entities to both be innovative, operate, and actually provide this reputational premium that you are doing your good within a good acting entity without having to have all the extra regulatory red tape or burden that, say, MiCAR has at the moment. That's my experience.
Perfect. Thank you, Mai, for that. I agree. And I think that aligns well with also with what Agustin was mentioning about the registration. What a lot of countries that do not have a full compliance or licensing regime is you can register, just like BMA, the first jurisdiction in Bermuda, I know you mentioned before, has a regulatory sandbox, which is basically just a program that the regulator does, or the regulator creates, and it allows new businesses and it allows existing businesses, banks, funds, securities exchanges to try and experiment with new businesses locally, just with a keen eye from the regulator. So there's a higher level of collaboration. The registration is the first step so that the regulator knows the new activity. The sandbox is a place to experiment safely without needing to regulate everything with a new law every few weeks, like we have seen. I'll mention other jurisdictions. And in particular, the new accounting, what I see coming up in Bolivia is the accounting between digital currencies, which are, of course, including Bitcoin and Ethereum, and stablecoins. And we should recognize that stablecoins are not always worth $1.000000. Sometimes it goes a little bit up and a little bit down. And that's very important when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. So I want to ask, are you still on? Thibaut?
Yes, sorry. Were you asking me? Yes.
If you can share. If you can share just a little bit of how TaxBit goes about the approach of accounting for digital assets when you're trading for an institution. For example, you have the company and then you have the user, and both the company and the person needs to have their accounting correctly. How do you structure that in TaxBit? How do you approach that?
Thank you. It depends on the jurisdictions, and unfortunately, it's one of those questions that you have to answer with that it depends. As you very well said, one of our biggest customers is the IRS in the United States. Naturally, the United States has a very unique way of taxing. I don't know, I mean, many of you might know, that you have to do your self-certification and you have to report and file your taxes voluntarily every year. We do that differently in Europe. A great example to address what you're saying is what is happening right now with CAF, Crypto Asset Regulation Framework, and DAC 8, which is going to be the European application of that. If we look at the CAF landscape right now, Bolivia is not represented on that. We have some nations that have agreed to it and committed to start in January 2026, and other nations that are starting in 2027. This goes from an array of examples. So within Europe, we have 27 different types of legislations and applications on this tax reporting. The HMRC shared their directives, the initial directives, a few weeks ago. And if you don't apply these self-certification principles, you as an exchange get a fine, which is something interesting that Bolivia could be looking at. But again, as Mai was very well saying, if you over-regulate, then you could be scaring away some of the players. On the other hand, you don't want to be the jurisdiction that is hosting the next FTX. So you want to have that balance, between protecting the end users that you were very well saying, Thomas, but also giving a fertile ground of innovation and technology and adaptation. One thing that I would say that I have seen in Europe, and this, again, sorry, Maya, I'm speaking a bit too much to you here. Tomorrow I'm flying to The Hague to the Europol Crypto Assets Conference. It's fantastic to go there because you are with all the law enforcement agencies and players like Binance, like Coinbase, like Kraken, other suppliers as well. And you have that public and private cohesive efforts, which is something that I would suggest from day dot to Bolivia really embrace, because it helps to have a secure adoption of the technology and also to protect the end user. So it goes beyond taxing for me. It's a whole, I would say, overarching, holistic adaptation of the whole environment.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Thibaut. Thank you for all of the panelists. Thank you for the people. Thank you for the hosts as well for being patient with the time. I think this was an important conversation. I think we can make a material impact in supporting Bolivia's regulatory development so that we have access to the tools that will help in the crisis, and we create infrastructure that will help for the long-term growth of the economy in Bolivia. Thank you so much to the panelists.
Sure. Thank you.
Much, Tristan.
Thank you.
A big round of applause for all the panelists and for everyone here. We have some announcements. So I'm going to switch to Spanish. Again, thank you. You can, you made this, can you? Muchas gracias por todo. Tenemos ciertos anuncios para hacerles. Queda un panel, el panel 5, que es después de un pequeño refrigerio y una demostración cultural en el patio histórico de esta Asamblea Legislativa. Está acá en el piso 1, es la conexión entre el edificio antiguo y el edificio nuevo, en donde van a poder tener una oportunidad de hacer networking, de conocerse, de charlar como lo han hecho en el almuerzo o continuar las conversaciones que tenían. Existen, sin embargo, digamos, un razonamiento paralelo para ciertos representantes de asociaciones que estén involucrados en la industria financiera o estén involucrados en el desarrollo de soluciones con activos virtuales. Las personas que quieran están invitadas a quedarse. Vamos a hacer una pequeña mesa de trabajo donde vamos a compartir ciertos criterios que ya se han reunido de los panelistas. Vamos a tener la oportunidad de darles la palabra por unos minutos para ver los takeaways, las principales lecciones que estamos tomando del panel, pero la mayoría de la gente, si decide pasar a tomar un refrigerio en el patio histórico y volver, por favor, es importante que vuelvan, porque el último panel es sobre industria de pagos y es algo muy importante para la economía boliviana en estos momentos. Así que les rogaríamos que puedan tomar este break y volver, por favor. ASO Blockchain, Cabloc, Asociación Boliviana de Derecho Informático, Cámara FinTech, CAINCO y otros actores son bienvenidos a quedarse con nosotros para una pequeña exposición mientras pasa la demostración cultural. Gracias.
Por favor, también recordarles que a las personas que tienen audífonos, al salir del auditorio los puedan devolver, asimismo los podrán adquirir al regreso del refrigerio. También el personal de protocolo se encuentra en la parte de afuera para poder guiarlos hasta el patio histórico que se encuentra en la planta baja. Muchas gracias.
Hola. Bueno, entonces, por favor, a todos aquellos que representan una asociación, una fundación o son miembros de la sociedad civil y activistas tecnológicos, son invitados y bienvenidos a quedarse. Vamos a hacer una pequeña presentación. Sin embargo, obviamente entiendo que también una bebida, un descanso y una oportunidad de conversar y generar relaciones es importante. Por lo tanto, ASO Blockchain, Fundación Internet Bolivia, a Sofín, a Soban u otras que quieran quedarse con nosotros por un momento, es totalmente bienvenido y les prometo que van a alcanzar a volver a tomar un refrigerio antes del panel 5 de industria y medios de pago. Con 3 mesas acá está muy bien acá. ¿Sí? Ajá. Pueden venir y tomar asiento acá en las mesas de trabajo. 3. O sea, deja la cuarta por si acaso. Sí, las 4 ahí por si. Acá nomás. No, acá todos. En este lado. Buenas. ¿Cómo están? Mucho gusto. Mucho gusto, Alejandro.
Yo vivo en Santa Cruz, he venido para el evento.
Excelente.
Yo estoy trayendo a Bolivia Crypto Market.
Bienvenido,
Crypto
muy
Market es
bien.
un exchange en la
Excelente,
primera
claro.
Latinoamérica.
Perfecto.
Estamos llegando ya como exchange en 3 semanas ya empezamos en Santa Cruz.
Buenísimo.
Y yo tengo personalmente una pasarela de pagos por aquí.
Excelente. Buenísimo.
Con todo, con toda la trazabilidad.
Excelente. ¿Conectada con una entidad financiera, la pasarela?
Sí, estamos ya manejando directamente de los mismos bolivianos, estamos colocando ahí ya monedas de afuera en cantidades importantes.
Buenísimo, me parece muy bien. Necesitan de market makers y de integraciones. Este es el evento para poder conversar. Obviamente la regulación es el problema, así que...
Sí, ahorita no tengo, tengo otra, pero ya otra vez soy importador de diésel también.
¿No?
Empecé por esto, empecé por importar diésel, necesitaba conseguir los dólares.
Y armar toda la tecnología.
Y ahí fue donde empecé armando todo este tema de las criptos. Pero de todas maneras, me gustaría conocerte, yo vivo en Santa Cruz.
Excelente, Alejandro. No tengo ahí una tarjeta para darte, pero te escribo. Perfecto. Tenemos oficinas en La Paz y Santa Cruz, así que va a ser un gusto conversar contigo. Nosotros asesoramos a 2 grupos financieros, al ganadero en toda su sección de valores y de SAFI, y acá en Ecofuturo a toda su sección de innovación tecnológica. Entonces, va a ser bueno que conversemos con Ale.
Uno de los socios principales nuestros es José Luis Camacho de...
de seguros.
Claro.
Excelente.
Justamente mañana teníamos que estar en el almuerzo, pero yo me tengo que ir esta noche, no voy a poder.
Pero perfecto, empecemos la conversación, Alejandro. Muchísimo gusto. Claro que sí, por supuesto. Tenemos que seguir conversando de todo esto. Son bienvenidos a sentarse, por favor. Vamos a proyectar un documento en la pantalla. Solo ya, sí, porque es muy dividido. Sí, si alguno quiere sentarse más allá está bien. Obviamente este documento va a ser compartido. Yo lo que les voy a pedir es vamos a circular, creo que ya ha circulado en realidad una lista con sus datos de contacto que ha pedido la Asamblea. Sin embargo, obviamente yo voy a tomar especial atención a los que estén presentes para poder compartir una comunidad que se está formando, sobre todo para hacer frente a lo que se han dado cuenta que está pasando, que es la ausencia del regulador en la conversación con el sector privado. Por lo tanto, los representantes del sector privado tienen una voz y estamos generando estos espacios de conversación en la Asamblea para que puedan tomar asiento y se les pueda exponer un poco. Si podemos recorrer un poco las mesas hacia acá para poder ver la pantalla sería ideal. Y yo voy a dar la vueltecito aquí a la... Ahí nomás, cuidado. Sí. Ahí. Exacto, ahí nomás. Sí. Excelente. ¿Dónde está? Este es el documento. Ya. ¿Le puedes bajar a la segunda página, por favor? Así le vamos a poner. Le voy a decir, por favor, que vaya. Es un documento Word. Entonces, no. Pero eso se puede grabar. Está bien que se... que no hay nadie, ¿no? Se han movido todas las mesas, no se ve. Ya. Sí, por favor, para que quede grabado como... Excelente. Yo le voy diciendo que baje un poquito, pero ahí está bien, ahí está perfecto. Perfecto. Entonces, lo que tenemos para presentarles es un pequeño documento de lineamientos y estrategias que se va tomando nota como recomendaciones regulatorias para identificar oficialmente una minuta de comunicación desde el Comité de Ciencia y Tecnología a la Autoridad de Supervisión del Sistema Financiero, a la Unidad de Investigaciones Financieras y al Banco Central, de tal manera de que pueda quedar un documento programático de política pública que represente ciertos lineamientos en base a los principios de la Ley de Participación y Control Social, de la cual ustedes son parte, al ser representantes de colectivos ciudadanos, al ser representantes de asociaciones, gremios y otras entidades de control y en realidad exigencia y rendición de cuentas del Poder Ejecutivo. Entonces, si bien hemos hecho todos los esfuerzos para que el regulador esté presente en un evento de tan alto nivel, con speakers, componentes que nos han mostrado las experiencias de Qatar, en Suiza, en El Salvador, en Argentina, representantes de grandes exchanges como en el caso de Binance, etcétera, lamentablemente, obviamente por el contexto, muchas veces el regulador no se siente cómodo haciendo una política de puertas abiertas, y si bien se pueden tener reuniones sectoriales o reuniones específicas, muchas veces la comunidad, la sociedad civil se siente ignorada, siente que realmente sus aportes no han sido tomados en cuenta. Entonces, parte de la metodología de trabajo de la Asamblea Legislativa Plurinacional es proponer ciertos proyectos como el proyecto de reglamento. Sabemos que la Asamblea no tiene una tuición directa sobre la ASFI, reglamento acorde a las necesidades del sector, pero la Asamblea lo que sí puede hacer es minutas de comunicación, peticiones de informe escrito y requerir a la autoridad que en base a la Ley de Participación y Control Social, ustedes como actores sean tomados en cuenta en el debate democrático y puedan transmitir su expertise, que ha sido una de las conclusiones de todos los paneles, como ustedes han sido testigos. La regulación debe ser colaborativa, no puede ser a puerta cerrada y menos sobre cosas que no se entienden. Por favor, si podemos entonces bajar un poco el scroll del documento. Esto se les va a compartir, por eso vamos a hacer esta pequeña mesa de trabajo es más para que incluso nos den un poco de feedback, pero obviamente no tenemos mucho tiempo, así que podemos generar mayor debate posteriormente. Entonces, el objeto de un reglamento es generar las normas y procedimientos específicos para el registro, la autorización, el funcionamiento, la supervisión y el cierre de los proveedores de servicios de activos virtuales PSAB. Eso es el mandato que le da el Decreto Supremo FinTech a la ASFI y por lo tanto debemos respetar ese alcance. Obviamente el ámbito de aplicación ya es una sugerencia de la Asamblea Legislativa para ustedes, es abogar porque la aplicación solo se genere a aquellas personas naturales o jurídicas que tienen como actividad comercial con fines de lucro la realización de operaciones con activos virtuales para o en nombre de terceros. Para o en nombre de terceros. Esa frase no está en el reglamento original, sin embargo, creemos que es muy importante esta aclaración porque varios usuarios comerciales de las plataformas que tienen fin de lucro, pero su fin de lucro solo es aprovecharse del cambio de valor y no tanto así de la tecnología subyacente, ni de custodiar activos por cuenta de terceros como fondos de inversión, como operadores de valores, como tokenizadores, no deberían estar alcanzados por estos reglamentos. Entonces, se excluyen del ámbito de aplicación las casas de cambio y los usuarios comerciales de PSAB que operan en el mercado P2P a cuenta y capital propio, realizando operaciones de compraventa de activos virtuales en plataformas digitales o billeteras virtuales. Este es entonces el primer lineamiento de recomendación que quisiéramos compartirles. Creemos que una de las digamos, de las mayores ansiedades del sector es que se excluya simplemente usuarios que tienen una intención de cambio virtual. Las definiciones han sido extraídas del decreto porque no se puede apartar de las definiciones, pero si le puede dar ahora la página 2, o sea, la próxima página, por favor. Vamos a generar un concepto muy importante. Necesitamos que se defina específicamente lo que es el entorno controlado de pruebas. El segundo lineamiento que como Asamblea Comité queremos recomendar, pero que también les contamos y requerimos de su opinión y o de su apoyo, es que todas las iniciativas sean sometidas a un proceso de arenero regulatorio en lugar de ser sometidas a una licencia de funcionamiento específica por sector. La licencia de funcionamiento es un trámite que de acuerdo a la recopilación de normas de servicio financiero exige requerimientos de capital, exige requerimientos de conducta y de currículums de los accionistas y de montos comprometidos de inversión y de plan estratégico y de plan de mercado y otro tipo de documentación que sería excluyente para desarrollar un sector naciente como es el de activos virtuales. Por lo tanto, creemos que el habilitar un entorno controlado de pruebas como está en el reglamento debería ser la prioridad para la ASFI en lugar de generar un reglamento operativo directamente. Entonces, el entorno controlado de pruebas en la redacción del decreto supremo, lamentablemente dice que la ASFI podrá requerir a su criterio a que ciertos emprendimientos entren en el entorno en lugar de lo que tratamos de sugerir en el reglamento, que es debería ingresarse primero al diseño del reglamento del entorno controlado de pruebas y de la habilitación de participantes en ese entorno, que imponer cargas sobre reguladas a los actores, a los administrados. Los requisitos para la constitución, nosotros consideramos que deben dividirse en dos. Las empresas que se constituyen legalmente en Bolivia como empresas unipersonales o personas jurídicas, y dos, las entidades constituidas en el extranjero con registro ante la autoridad financiera de su país. Creemos firmemente, y esto también ha sido un producto del conversatorio, de que grandes empresas como Binance u otros exchange que operan en otros mercados realmente ya tienen una habilitación similar a la que los reaseguradores, por ejemplo, tienen en el mercado local, que simplemente tienen que hacer un trámite ante la APS de reconocimiento, de homologación de su licencia previamente adquirida. ¿Por qué en el caso de seguros las empresas reaseguradoras son dadas este tratamiento dispendioso, digamos, más laxo? Y es por una situación de análisis económico de costo-beneficio. No se puede exigir a las reaseguradoras internacionales a que se domicilien en el país de la misma manera que no se puede exigir a los global exchanges a que cumplan con requerimientos de localización o domiciliación que arriesgan luego el mercado P2P que en estos momentos está sosteniendo nuestra economía. Por lo tanto, es una sugerencia también del Comité de Ciencia y Tecnología que la ASFI pueda dividir entre las iniciativas fintech locales y las iniciativas internacionales que ya tienen un registro, una regulación, una licencia, como hemos visto, sea de Money Service Business en Estados Unidos, sea de proveedor de servicios de activos digitales en El Salvador, o sea de proveedor de servicios de activos virtuales en Argentina, que ya son homologados y son, digamos, validados por instituciones internacionales con mayor experiencia. El proceso de autorización, bueno, el capital mínimo para los PSABs debería fijarse en un monto nominal. 10.000 UFBs de capital podría ser un capital de referencia accesible para los emprendedores en lugar de grandes mecanismos de cobertura o garantía que lamentablemente excluirían a proyectos de tokenización que recién están iniciando, a proyectos de emprendedores de las comunidades blockchain que realmente no tienen como startups el acceso a capitales que, por ejemplo, sí pueden tener los incumbentes, las entidades financieras, etcétera. El proceso de autorización, además, consideramos que simplemente debe ser realizado en base a factores de operación en infraestructura tecnológica y cumplimiento normativo. Para las casas de cambio se exigen requerimientos de infraestructura física, para los bancos un data server alterno, para las asociaciones, perdón, para las IFDs y otros organismos sin fines de lucro se les requiere un gran componente de la recopilación de normas de servicios financieros. Entonces, lo que buscamos es que los requerimientos de capital sean adecuados para garantizar que los desarrolladores de PSABs no sean afectados o excluidos de la regulación. En el capítulo de actividades autorizadas, añadimos las operaciones de tokenización sujetas al reglamento específico de entorno controlado de pruebas. Es decir, generar un arenero regulatorio específico para la tokenización que sea una forma de experimentar con emisión de tokens sin los requerimientos del mercado de valores, que obviamente también son bastante fuertes. Se exige un prospecto, se exige una garantía fiduciaria, un underwriter, una agencia de titularización o una agencia de bolsa, solamente para hacer el exchange, y eso limita que nuestro mercado de valores, por esa razón, es limitado no a títulos de capital, sino a títulos de préstamos entre grandes empresas y el inversionista institucional número uno, que es la gestora. Por lo tanto, la tokenización debería ser un instrumento de democratización del acceso al capital y, por lo tanto, no se debería restringir de la manera en la que se fiscaliza a las operaciones bursátiles. Por último, bajamos por favor del artículo 8, operaciones permitidas. Buscamos diferenciar entre lo que puede hacer un PSAB unipersonal y un PSAB con personalidad jurídica constituida, de la misma manera que las casas de cambio, cuando son SRLs, SAs, tienen mayores atribuciones que cuando son unipersonales. Los unipersonales deberían estar habilitados a tener plataformas digitales para intercambio entre activos virtuales y monedas fiduciarias, intercambio entre diferentes activos virtuales y transferencia de activos virtuales. Sin embargo, cuando cuenten con personalidad jurídica, podrían ser empresas dedicadas a la custodia y administración por cuenta de terceros de los activos virtuales, billeteras digitales de custodia, servicios financieros, préstamos colaterales, swap, etcétera, relacionados a la garantía del activo virtual y las operaciones de tokenización. Bajamos, por favor, ya estamos terminando. Estos son lineamientos, están en borrador, así que siéntanse libres de darnos sus comentarios. Más abajo, gestión y control. Un poquito más abajo, por favor. En cuanto a cumplimiento, obviamente la UIF va a desarrollar reglamentos específicos para el reporte, para el KYC. En cuanto al entorno controlado de pruebas, como ya les habíamos dicho, ASFI necesita generar su reglamento antes de poner en marcha cualquier constitución de licencia de funcionamiento. Por último, plataformas digitales de intercambio. Es necesario que se reconozca el rol de los exchanges, tanto internacionales como nacionales, y pedimos que no se requiera, si es que están habilitados en el exterior u operan o están integrados con alguna entidad de intermediación financiera o pasarela de pago, no requieran mayores condiciones de infraestructura, siendo que su negocio se desarrolla virtualmente y con ausencia de oficinas de atención al usuario. Básicamente, si creemos que estos son criterios prudenciales, el costo-beneficio, el costo de que un proveedor de servicio activo virtual se domicilie, se localice y más aún si está integrado con una pasarela de pago a un banco, sería un despropósito. Por lo tanto, consideramos que para ahorrarle costo a la comunidad, es mejor que estos lineamientos no incluyan requerimientos específicos. Ya vamos a terminar y les voy a dar la palabra, una última hoja creo que hay, ¿o no? ¿Ya termina? Exacto, supervisión y puntos de atención. Básicamente se permite que los PSABs tengan puntos de atención virtuales en lugar de ese punto de atención al consumidor físico que representa igual un costo. Y en cuanto a prohibiciones, obviamente y razonablemente, podemos bajar un poquito más. Obviamente creemos que las dos principales prohibiciones para protección del consumidor financiero deberían ser la inclusión en la publicidad o documentos emitidos, el ofrecimiento, la referencia inexacta, capciosa o la garantía indebida de retornos de inversión, realizar promesas, alterar mercados en plataformas de intercambio o negarse a transferir los activos virtuales o la moneda fiat a requerimiento de sus usuarios. Creo que esos son los principios básicos de protección al consumidor que un PSB ya considera autorregulándose además. Por lo tanto, consideramos que si existen empresas registradas, como ya decía, de Money Service Business, de CNAD en la República del Salvador o de PSAB en Argentina, estos podrían ser criterios habilitantes para su actividad. Entonces, ahora les cedo la palabra, voy a circular el micrófono entre todos ustedes como representantes. Obviamente los que no quieran comentar verbalmente pueden comentar por escrito y hacernos llegar su feedback, que es muy importante para nosotros. Sin embargo, si quieren, por 1 o 2 minutos, dar algunos criterios adicionales de los que debamos tomar nota, nosotros estamos atentos, así que les agradezco mucho. Por favor, su nombre, su institución y posteriormente su comentario.
Buenas tardes, yo soy Marcelo Vizcarra de Bolchain y también de la comunidad de cajeros oficiales de Binance. Se siente un poco que se desconoce a la comunidad de los cajeros, porque, a ver, básicamente al excluir a las cajas de cambio y al excluir a los cajeros de ser PSABs, parece que se estuviera un poco desconociendo la realidad nacional. Todos los cajeros que son, por ejemplo, Gold o los de bloques, tienen que entender que mínimo de requerimientos son 2 millones de USDT al mes que movemos. Y eso es el mínimo. La mayoría mueve entre 3 a 10 bitcoins día para que más o menos puedan calcular cuánto es lo que movemos los cajeros que son Gold y de bloques. Entonces, al excluirnos y al no ser parte de los PSABs, no me parece prudente. Por otro lado, de la forma como está configurada la situación en este momento, la mayoría de nosotros son los que pagamos a veces a los proveedores bueno, los lugares de importación, que ya sean cuentas de Estados Unidos o cuentas de Japón. Nosotros somos los que tenemos los mecanismos para poder trasladar el dinero hacia otras partes, ¿no? Porque lamentablemente el poco conocimiento que tienen las empresas para poder realizar los pagos hace que dependan de muchos terceros y nosotros somos los que podemos pagar de forma inmediata y somos los que en este momento tenemos más experiencia de realizar todo eso. Por eso me parece que no deberíamos ser excluidos simplemente por ser casas de cambio de los PSAPs.
Perfecto. Solo para aclarar el concepto, más bien creemos nosotros que les haríamos, no sé si el favor, pero básicamente excluirlos de la regulación significa facilitar sus operaciones. Pero creo que el concepto es que ustedes quieren registrarse ante la UIF, quieren obtener una licencia de funcionamiento, ¿sí?
El problema más grande que tenemos nosotros son los bancos. Aparte de que cada uno de nosotros tenemos límites que están entre 1 a 3 millones de bolivianos diarios, la cantidad de requerimientos que nos piden los bancos, cada semana nos hacen llamar y en algunos casos es sencillo porque podemos presentar los contratos con las empresas, pero en otros casos no podemos y Binance no nos provee una cantidad de comprobantes muy alta al mes. Entonces, nosotros necesitamos de alguna forma estar regulados ante como PSAPs, ante los bancos, para que nuestra forma de operar sea más fácil. Ese es nuestro problema.
Excelente. Estoy pensando ahí todavía sobre ideas, mientras algunos pueden también expresar su opinión, pero por ejemplo, el reconocimiento regulatorio es distinto que la obligación de obtener licencia. Lamentablemente el procedimiento de licencia generalmente es bastante difícil de acceder a través de los costos de transacción. Entonces, quizá pensando en voz alta, el reglamento podría sugerir el reconocimiento legal de los cajeros y los usuarios comerciales, pero regularlos es algo que continúa siendo algo muy crítico, un reto.
Gracias, Ismael. Mi nombre es Ariela Gramont, presidente de la Academia Boliviana de Derecho Informática. Tenemos también dos de los vicepresidentes que nos acompañan, Nicole y Fabián. Bueno, en principio felicitar a la Asamblea por abrir este espacio con la sociedad civil y diferentes actores del sistema financiero. Falta evidentemente la ASFI, sería mejor un debate con ellos porque de otra manera es como que estamos haciendo las cosas aparte. Pero este es el primer reglamento borrador, modelo, una propuesta, bien lo has planteado así, y de acá llevas muchos feedbacks. Y yo tengo particularmente una observación. Si bien en el ámbito de seguros, reaseguros, hay esa figura, ¿no?, de que la empresa extranjera simplemente trae sus documentos y se registra y para de contar. En el caso de los criptoactivos, digamos, ¿en qué medida estaríamos garantizando la igualdad ante la ley, ¿no?, en los requisitos que van a tener empresas bolivianas de querer hacer el mismo negocio, que es su país, su jurisdicción virtual, digamos, sin menoscabar sus derechos que tendrían comparados con los derechos que tendrían los extranjeros, ¿no? O sea, veo artículos muy interesantes, parece bien, pero creo que deberíamos ahí evitar una discriminación por ser empresa boliviana y que esté sometida a más requisitos de los que podría tener Binance o cualquier otro exchange o cualquier otra empresa extranjera, ¿no? Entonces yo sería partidario de una regulación minimalista, creo que lo han dicho incluso en las exposiciones, ¿no? No conocemos este tema como país, nunca lo hemos regulado. Entonces, quizás afrontar una regulación más cautelosa, ¿no? Ya lo decía el compañero, yo estoy de acuerdo con este nombre, Marcel, estoy de acuerdo, por ejemplo, ¿cómo no los van a incluir a ellos, que son los que realmente están moviendo cantidades significativas de dinero? Porque todos en este país quieren trabajar legalmente. O sea, nadie quiere hacer un negocio que al final sea medio irregular, o que mañana te van a cerrar la cuenta, o que pasado mañana te van a meter preso, ¿no es verdad? Entonces, quizás crear niveles regulatorios distintos, ¿no? O sea, no es lo mismo el negocio que realiza él, que es similar al de las casas de cambio, que tienen su autorización ante la ASFI, que un negocio muy bien regulado en el reglamento que proponen, como puede ser los exchange, ¿no? Un exchange o de pronto una billetera virtual. Entonces, quizás crear niveles, requisitos más leves para personas que trabajan como digamos, grupo de gente, ¿no? Que están laburando y haciendo un bien al país, versus otras empresas más grandes que también van a querer establecerse. Pero sí, mi recomendación, mucho cuidado con crear desigualdades, o sea, que ser boliviano con una empresa de este tipo sea más desventajoso porque estoy sometido a la autoridad de empresas y a todo ese sistema regulatorio, que una empresa como Binance que remotamente va a trabajar en Bolivia y no va a tener ninguna sanción, ¿no? Entonces, por eso hay que crear un equilibrio. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Ariel, por tu comentario. Es verdad que se estaría creando una especie de arbitraje regulatorio, les dicen, una incompetencia entre la regulación local y la regulación internacional. Algo que puedo rescatar de análisis económico del derecho es justamente que en el tema de reaseguros ya se ha hecho eso. Es difícil hacer una reaseguradora local, pero una reaseguradora internacional le damos más rápido el visto bueno de operar. Y creo que es por la circunstancia económica, pero valoro mucho tu criterio y considero que podemos continuar con varios actores. Por si acaso estamos tomando todo esto en cuenta. Esto era un borrador, así que todos los comentarios van a ser disponibles.
Gracias, Ismael. A Huáscar Miranda de la Blockchain. Un aspecto tal vez conceptual que incluir cuando hablamos de blockchain y contratos inteligentes, por ejemplo, las billeteras descentralizadas no son custodias. Y eso tiene que estar súper claro, ¿no? Y no solamente las billeteras, ¿no? Por ejemplo, cuando trabajas con contratos inteligentes, tú no custodias. Cuando haces una billetera descentralizada, tú no custodias nada, simplemente eres una puerta de acceso a la blockchain, ¿no? Entonces, eso sería bueno conceptualizar para que la ASFI sepa muy bien identificar una billetera que es Web 2, básicamente, ¿no? Es otra cosa totalmente diferente. Y una billetera descentralizada que es totalmente diferente, ¿no? Aunque tienen el mismo objeto, básicamente, ¿no? Eso, nada más.
Excelente, gracias, Huáscar. Es verdad que justamente esta regulación está diseñada para billeteras Web 2, porque la finanza descentralizada incluso debería estar excluida de estos reglamentos, porque ese es su principio liberal, no tener una realmente autorización que la centralice. Pero bueno, vamos a pasar acá con Fabián.
Gracias, Ismael. Sigo al registro Fabián Espinosa con varias camisetas, creo. Mencionábamos Vicepresidencia de Academia Boliviana de Derecho Informático, Cámara Blockchain y PPO Abogados. Da lo mismo, al final el criterio es el interesante. Decía que quizás también para fines organizativos, entendiendo que no es fácil confluir gente importante, a pesar de que los reguladores quizás sí van a recibir directa o indirectamente esto, quizás en paralelo, antes de mirar las consideraciones de fondo y de estructura del reglamento, no estaría de más poder, en el mejor sentido constructivo de la palabra, atacar el decreto, que entiendo que más de ustedes debe tener un montón de observaciones. Yo he enumerado en lo personal una decena de fondo, constructivo todo, ¿no? Entonces quizás estaría bueno en simultáneo, no en lugar de, pero en paralelo y en simultáneo, poder mirar como nos podemos permitir en este espacio, como lápiz y borrador, y decir esto más, esto menos, por qué esto no iría y por qué no, y entiendo que también esto podría ser bueno por la falta de posible, no sé, consolidación en que el decreto puede que hoy está y mañana sabemos que no, ¿no? Dado los antecedentes de que en estas tecnologías emergentes, como un antecedente, el tema de los planes institucionales se han pospuesto como 3 veces y ya vamos hasta el 2030, entonces no vaya a ser tampoco un nuevo caso así. Entonces, digo, antes de entrar en materia, dar algún criterio que va a ser, creo, entiendo, nuestro espacio de deliberación, podría ser esto bueno como aporte o como sugerencia, lo pongo también en consideración.
Gracias, estás en lo correcto, Fabián, que una de las atribuciones también en el comité es hacer acciones de inconstitucionalidad abstracta. El problema de la situación de justicia de nuestro país, como todos lo sabemos, es tediosa, tarda mucho, y el conocimiento técnico de nuestro Tribunal Constitucional realmente, a pesar de que ya hay cierto cambio de nivel de este con el anterior, todavía continúa en proceso. Entonces, efectivamente, creo que si vamos a abrir, por si acaso, estos lineamientos a una plataforma pública discusión, los vamos a invitar a dar sus criterios por escrito, pero efectivamente uno de los criterios puede ser ayudarnos a construir una acción de inconstitucionalidad o una acción que trate de, como dice Fabián, atacar el decreto. Obviamente también estamos trabajando con lo que podemos tener, que es el plazo es tan corto para la regulación, que nos apremia el tener recomendaciones que al menos mandar para que se integren, de ser el caso. Pero como dicen, hay una esperanza de que esto se posponga por justamente la gran magnitud de documentación técnica que debería revisar el regulador antes de implementar estos espacios.
Muchas gracias, estimado Ismael. Sergio Rodríguez, abogado, asesoramos a su blockchain. Bueno, evidentemente hay que tener en cuenta el nivel o la aproximación en la que se estaría estableciendo esta reglamentación. ¿Por qué voy a esto? Porque primero, uno de los problemas que, coincidiendo con Fabián, tiene el decreto supremo es la falta de enfoque o directriz sobre la forma en que se va a regular a cada uno de estos servicios. Entonces, la regulación, esta propuesta regulatoria, quizás podría tener esa aproximación. ¿A qué me voy? Por ejemplo, hay diferentes formas en las que se puede tokenizar. Si se va a concentrar en los utility tokens o los security tokens, ¿qué mecanismos se van a utilizar? Por ejemplo, los sistemas de pago. ¿Qué es lo que se va a propugnar? La seguridad, la prevención contra el lavado, la democratización. Entonces, esos enfoques, esas aproximaciones, aunque no se dé cuenta quizás el regulador, va a tener que establecer esa política, que es una política pública de cómo se va a hacer la aproximación, ¿no? Ahora, con relación a la estructura de la propuesta, lo que se sugiere es que en realidad se tenga una diferenciación de acuerdo a la proporcionalidad del volumen de servicios, por una parte, y por otra parte, el tipo de servicios. Entonces, la estructura del reglamento tendría que estar organizado y definido de acuerdo a estos dos criterios, de forma que, por ejemplo, si vamos a regular a los PCAB, simplemente para operaciones de menos de, no sé, 100,000 USDTs, se tenga una obligación de registro. Pero ¿cuál es la ventaja o cuál es el beneficio de incluir en la regulación a los PCAB o cajeros, por ejemplo? Es que los bancos ya no les pidan tantos requisitos, ¿no es cierto? Entonces, equilibrar esos elementos para que no se corte o sea, no se burocratice la inclusión de estos servicios, pero para este servicio de pagos. En cambio, para tokenización, por ejemplo, en realidad la regulación tiene que tener otro enfoque, otra aproximación que va a ser más principalmente otorgar estabilidad al sistema de pagos, ¿no es cierto? Entonces, me parece muy interesante esta propuesta de reglamento, sin embargo, creo que habría que profundizar mucho más. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Sergio. Es verdad que todavía queda un camino por recorrer para justo generar profundización. Creo que una de las conclusiones es que el reconocimiento regulatorio del registro, por ejemplo, de los usuarios comerciales, podría ir por la UIF para justo mostrar al banco que uno es transparente y está documentando sus operaciones en UIF, pero no sé si una licencia de funcionamiento sea el camino. Yo he asesorado un par de casas de cambio, no sé si por mal abogado o no, pero mi trámite me tomó 7 meses para autorizar, certificar una casa de cambio. ¿Por qué? Porque hasta el inspector de la ASFIN observaba la ventanilla, o sea, los centímetros de la ventanilla prácticamente. Entonces, no quisiéramos que eso les ocurra, que tengan que paralizar sus operaciones hasta no obtener una licencia que podría tomar, obviamente, mucho tiempo. Sin embargo, me quedo también con que la profundización y las distintas maneras de enfocar los tipos de tokens y los tipos de actividades o operaciones es importante y por eso necesitamos contar de su feedback.
Quisiera sugerir, querido Ismael, que creo que hay que dar un paso atrás, ¿no? O sea, para empezar, estamos de acuerdo con el decreto supremo. O sea, creo que esa es la primera pregunta que hay que hacer a la audiencia, ¿no? sociedad civil, asociaciones. Personalmente yo te diría, yo creo que no es necesario, ¿no? Las cosas están funcionando bien, tal vez la UIF, sí, por ahí hay un tema de lavado de dinero, registro, me parece muy necesario eso, que cumple con el AML y el KYC suficiente, ¿ya? Ahí cumples ya los estándares, ya puedes trabajar, a Panamá está trabajando así y hay otros países también en la misma ruta. ¿Cuál es la necesidad, cuál es la urgencia de que la ASFI haga esto? ¿No ve? Ya. Esa es la primera pregunta. Si la respuesta a esa pregunta es, sí, queremos regular las PSAPs por A, B, C, etcétera, ok. La segunda pregunta ahí sería, ¿y todo el decreto supremo está bien hecho? ¿No ve? Porque si el decreto supremo tiene fallas, creo que además de la propuesta, también tendríamos que incluir un otro documento que diga propuesta de modificación del decreto supremo, ¿no ve? Para que la regulación sea, como bien nos han ilustrado los más expertos, algo, digamos, minimalista, ¿no ve? O sea, el Estado puede regular cuando quiera, pero ¿cuál es la urgencia de hacerlo todo en uno? Vamos paso a paso. Me parece excelente iniciar con una propuesta desde acá, pero también te propondría un documento paralelo, decir, oye, ¿qué modificaciones debería tener ese decreto supremo para que la gente pueda trabajar tranquila? ¿No? Porque si sacas un decreto así, una propuesta de esta naturaleza, pues ya van a, mira, hay personas que están trabajando $2 millones, o me equivoco, ya, tiene sentido, lo están haciendo mal. Esto debería ser 10 millones, 20 millones, pero con una regulación adecuada.
Excelente, gracias por tu comentario. Y es algo que se ha reflexionado con la diputada, la secretaria del comité y con los diputados en cuanto a las atribuciones y el camino legal que ha seguido este decreto. Como sabrán, en la ley del presupuesto general del Estado 2024 que aprobó el, una disposición adicional que decía que el Poder Ejecutivo deberá reglamentar las empresas de tecnología financiera. Entonces, al tener un marco legal y un mandato de hacer el decreto, realmente impugnar el decreto va fuera de nuestras atribuciones. Sugerir la modificación, en cambio, es importante y por lo tanto, si bien estamos apremiados por intentar que el regulador, al menos el regulador, utilice una regulación prudencial, es posible atacar el decreto. Sin embargo, a nivel político, la reflexión para ustedes es, ¿podemos nosotros ir a bloquear las calles al Ministerio de Economía? ¿Somos un movimiento social o somos gente técnica que lo que quiere es que se la regule bien? Entonces, hemos entendido que estos gremios son más diplomáticos en su conversación que, digamos, un movimiento ciudadano. Ahora, obviamente, el tema va sobre cuánto caso nos puede hacer el Ministerio de Economía versus cuánto podemos influir en el regulador. Eso es algo que se debe sopesar. Sin embargo, estamos abiertos a recibir sus comentarios sobre el decreto y generar una minuta de comunicación específica para el Ministerio de Economía, que ha sido el proyectista.
¿Cómo están? Buenas tardes. Pamela Mendoza de Asobán. Efectivamente, todo lo que mencionaron es importante. Respecto al decreto supremo, hay muchas cosas que pueden mejorar, pero sinceramente toda norma es perfectible en el tiempo. Entonces, es importante avanzar, ¿no? Ya estamos casi un año ya habiéndose levantado la prohibición de hacer uso de con activos virtuales, entonces, y en este año ha sido un boom para los activos virtuales. Y también eso también abre un riesgo de fraudes, de que algunas personas pueden aprovechar de la situación, o en algún momento, hace tiempo atrás, había el tema de las estafas piramidales con bitcoins y demás. Para la banca es importante lograr la inclusión financiera de todos estos actores que operan con activos virtuales, porque obviamente es mejor tenerlos bancarizados a que operen en un mercado paralelo, ¿no? Sin embargo, la banca tiene que cuidar también todo lo que es su reputación, sus relaciones de corresponsalía y demás. Entonces, efectivamente, el tema de registro ante la UIF, eso ya está actualmente en vigencia y va a salir también un reglamento de la UIF para los PSAPs. Sin embargo, la UIF y su campo de acción es prevención del lavado de dinero y financiamiento al terrorismo. El campo de la operación como tal
de los PSAPs necesita ser regulado. En este caso, bueno, en el marco del decreto supremo va a ser la ASFI la autoridad encargada. Entonces, sí es importante que estén registrados, o sea, por un lado la UIF, pero solamente es en temas de prevención de lavado de dinero, y en el tema de la operación es la ASFI, porque estos actores prácticamente también están captando recursos del público. Entonces es necesario que esos recursos del público que están siendo captados a través de activos virtuales también estén respaldados, ¿no? Hoy día ya hemos hablado, o sea, los activos virtuales están por todo el mundo, a diferencia de las CBDCs, entonces no tienen un respaldo por detrás, pero al menos estas empresas que se dedican, obviamente estamos hablando de que, y coincido con lo que dices, o sea, una empresa como Binance va a tener mejores condiciones competitivas versus una empresa local. Efectivamente, eso no es correcto. Los bancos también hoy día son pesados, algunos ya están con el tema de los activos virtuales. Entonces, por ejemplo, en el reglamento no están incluidos las entidades financieras que son pesadas, que también tendrían que tener su marco de acción. Y también allá hay que ver tema de capitales, ¿no? O sea, porque tu capital social tiene que estar acorde al movimiento que realizas, porque por decirte 10.000 UFB, si mueves 2 millones, no tiene mucha relación, ¿no? Y por otra parte, ya es un tema más de forma, es importante también establecer bien el ámbito de aplicación, ¿no? Porque cuando existía la prohibición y después cuando se liberó, habían problemas porque la ASFI regulaba por los juegos, por lo que vas comprando los Robux en las plataformas, los pavos en no sé qué otro juego. Entonces, si existe un limbo en el que no sabes si es o no es, porque son activos virtuales, pero no del otro tipo de activos virtuales que se utilizan para el comercio, ¿no? Entonces, eso habría que delimitar. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Pamela. Me llevo justo el criterio también de la banca formal. Podría ser anticompetitivo generar mejores condiciones a los PSABs o a PSABs internacionales. Eso es real. Consideramos, pero obviamente todo esto es perfectible, como lo he dicho, que el pronunciamiento entonces mayoritario, pero nos lo van a hacer llegar también por escrito, no busca el generar estas diferencias. Tal vez la intención del Comité de Ciencia y Tecnología en su momento ha sido diseñar normas que se adapten al contexto económico, porque el temor de que una plataforma de exchange que en estos momentos está marcando la economía decida cerrar sus operaciones, siempre va también preocupar al legislador en el eventual caso en el que, por un mal diseño de la regulación, quedemos sin acceso a USDTs y tengamos que buscar alternativas ciudadanas más complejas, menos respaldadas incluso que las grandes plataformas globales. Sin embargo, creo que este es un ejercicio. Nosotros vamos a informarles a los contactos, a los correos de contacto que han generado. Vamos a darle la palabra a Cecilia antes de que vuelva toda la gente. Y
gracias, Ismael, y gracias a todos los que han aportado. Creo que hoy ha sido sumamente gráfico cómo todos los participantes de los paneles han ido insistiendo en las experiencias ya desarrolladas en otros países, ¿no? Específicamente el caso, por ejemplo, de El Salvador, que a pesar de que ha sido el primero y que ha tenido muchos desafíos, muchas complejidades, pero a pesar de esas complejidades ha ido adecuándose y mejorando sus normativas para tener ahora un ecosistema vibrante respecto de instituciones blockchain y de desarrollo blockchain y de desarrollo financiero con tecnología, ¿no? Entonces, creo que sería importante rescatar eso que se ha resaltado y recalcado en absolutamente todos los paneles y empezar a hacer ese análisis comparativo de lo que se ha implementado en El Salvador, obviamente no hacer un copy-paste, pero sí entender cómo eso se puede adaptar o mejorar para nuestro contexto, considerando también estas realidades que tenemos de PSABs muy activos y que están resolviendo las problemáticas de infusión de dólares dentro de la economía boliviana, ¿no? Por último, me llevo también el comentario respecto de la inclusión y la no discriminación, porque tenemos que necesariamente hacer crecer este ecosistema. Nosotros dentro de Ethereum Bolivia hacemos buildatones cada año y el año pasado ya hemos tenido casos exitosos que actualmente ya están en producción, entrando al mercado, brindando soluciones financieras con criptoactivos hacia la economía boliviana. Entonces, ¿por qué no seguir esa misma línea? Porque este año vamos a tener más. ¿Y quién no te dice que tengamos, en vez de 2 o 1, tengamos 10 proyectos que decidan continuar y entrar tal vez en una aceleradora, en una incubadora o lo que sea, que nos facilite las cosas y que nos demuestre que somos un hub tecnológico boliviano?
Excelente, gracias. Justo por eso también abogamos por entornos controlados de prueba para que estas iniciativas puedan florecer y ser experimentales, que la ASFI aprenda sobre esto. Ya casi no tenemos tiempo, los panelistas ya se están conectando, así que mil disculpas, pero lo siento, vamos a poder retirarnos a nuestros lugares, por favor. Va a empezar el quinto panel. Sin embargo, les anuncio que este documento programático preliminar va a ser compartido vía web y ustedes van a tener una casilla de habilitación para dar su opinión y poder fortalecer este comentario a partir de lo que estamos escuchando y a partir de mayores criterios de los expertos que se encuentran acá. Muchas gracias por el ejercicio y ahora vamos a pasar al quinto panel.
Bueno, esperemos que todos ya estén más relajados después del refrigerio. A continuación tendremos el quinto panel, custodia y pagos con activos virtuales. Le pasamos la palabra al moderador, Tristan Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is an exciting panel. We've been building up to this all day, and I know that we're all excited. We have really an incredible panelists set again. We have with us Fireblocks, Serena from Fireblocks, and John from Bank Social, and Marco from Evergreen DeFi. And ultimately, when it comes to today or tomorrow, making use of digital currency, making use of cryptocurrency, it comes down to being able to use it as a medium of exchange. That is where money is started, and that is where it is powerful. We have two of the leaders here that are developing in Latin America. If you can introduce yourselves, and then we'll give a little bit of opportunity to speak about your companies, and then how it is applying here in Bolivia.
Bueno, yo voy a hablar en español porque soy argentina, así que voy a hablar en mi idioma nativo. Primero que nada, es un placer estar acá. Estamos muy emocionados de que nos abrieran las puertas y este espacio para poder conversar. La situación actual de Bolivia es muy parecida a la Argentina hace unos años y con la tecnología pudimos apalear un poco y generar un bienestar. Tengo experiencia en todo lo que es infraestructura de 5 años aproximadamente y con Fireblocks nos posicionamos en Latinoamérica como la puerta de entrada segura a los activos digitales. Así que no los quiero aburrir, voy a pasar acá. Okay.
Hello. Well, you all know me from the last panel, so I'm not going to go into too much of an introduction again, but I have been in the space for a long time. I think you made a great point about how that we've seen, we've seen circular economies in this place. I was just talking with a gentleman, the sentiment that the communities, they change, they uplift. We're seeing circular economies in many countries. Like you said, Peru is another great example. We're seeing it in Africa. We're seeing it all over the world. So really novel ways that you can start to implement these solutions with tools like Bank Social, with tools like Fireblocks. There's other great tools in here like Bullbit and some other ones that are really looking at how to transform in a regulated way, in a safe, secure, and regulated way, with lowering risk, these systems so that they can benefit the people in the communities that we all serve.
And Marco?
Buenas, mi nombre es Marco Argüello, formo parte de Evergreen DeFi, que es un servicio que ayuda a sus clientes a ganar intereses sobre sus activos digitales. Todo esto mientras el capital es protegido. Lo más importante o bonito, ¿verdad? Esto es saber que lo hacemos sin tomar custodia de sus activos. Entonces, realizamos investigación, análisis, facilitamos implementaciones, ayudamos a manejar las posiciones, pero todo esto pasa siempre y cuando el cliente tiene total control de los activos.
Excelente punto. This brings us to the first question that I want to give to Sarina. Cryptocurrency is unique from normal banking in that cryptocurrency exists on the internet. So you do not need necessarily an institution. And we build confidence by having institutions to rely on, that we can put our money in and feel secure by having someone that knows where our money is, knows how it is kept safe. So if you can give some insight into how Fireblocks approaches the self-custody of ownership of digital currency and the trusted counterpart.
Perfecto, sí, un placer. Como Fireblocks, nosotros lo que hacemos principalmente es darle a nuestros clientes, es decir, instituciones, bancos y distintas empresas, la capacidad de que ellos, con nuestra tecnología, puedan custodiar los activos digitales de sus clientes. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Nosotros no tenemos acceso a los fondos ni los podemos tocar. Nosotros damos la tecnología para que puedan custodiar con nuestro conocimiento y la protección y además el soporte. La tecnología que tenemos es muy avanzada, capaz hayan escuchado lo que es MPC, que es Multi-Party Computation, es la tecnología más avanzada en todo lo que se refiere a custodia de activos digitales, en lo que no hay un único punto de compromiso. La clave está dividida en 3 partes. Entonces, todas las claves además van a estar encriptadas y protegidas. No hay una manera en que haya un hacker y se pueda introducir al sistema y se lleve todos sus activos. En segundo lugar, otra de las cuestiones muy importantes que ya se habló en el panel anterior, nuestra plataforma está nativamente integrada con todo lo que son los proveedores de KYT, AML y Travel Rule. Algunos de los más conocidos como Chainalysis, Elliptic, Notabene, es una integración que ya está embebida en nuestra plataforma. Entonces ustedes directamente ya se pueden conectar y estos proveedores lo que hacen es verificar que todas las transacciones no provengan de todo lo que es lavado de activos, financiación del terrorismo o actividades ilícitas. Sí. Perdón, hablo muy rápido. Después, voy a hablar un poco más lento. Tenemos todo lo que es las TAP Rules, que son políticas de gobernanza. Estas políticas de gobernanza son muy interesantes porque es otra layer de seguridad. Entonces ya les nombré 2. La primera es la plataforma, la tecnología MPC. La segunda son todos los proveedores de AML, KYT, Travel Rule. Luego tenemos otra capa de seguridad que son las TAP. Estas son reglas que ustedes pueden ir decidiendo respecto de sus transacciones. Por ejemplo, ustedes para enviar una transacción mayor a $10.000 necesitan una approval. Pero ¿qué pasa si son 100.000? ¿Cuántos approvals necesito? ¿Quiénes son las personas que van a firmar? Lo mismo si es una transacción interna, quizás no necesito approvals, pero va a una billetera externa, sí voy a necesitar un approval. Entonces son todas políticas que ustedes pueden ir posicionando en la plataforma e ir realizándolo con el equipo de compliance. Las últimas 2 son muy conocidas, lo que es el whitelisting en la plataforma. ustedes van a tener que blanquear todas las direcciones, no van a poder enviar fondos o recibir fondos de direcciones que no están blanqueadas. Y por último, los proveedores de Disaster and Recovery, que hoy en día para mí son esenciales, de hecho es un requerimiento mandatorio en esta plataforma. Estos proveedores son los que recuperan las claves y generan los backups. Algunos de los proveedores más conocidos son Station 70 y CoinCover, que también están ya integrados nativamente en la plataforma. ¿Qué quiero decir con todo esto? Es una plataforma que es muy consolidada y tiene muy buen desarrollo tecnológico, además del soporte y la experiencia. Ya trabajamos con bancos aquí, trabajamos con bancos a nivel global, puedo nombrar algunos, Bancolombia, BNY Mellon, BNP Paribas, HSBC, Revolut, Nubank, Mercado Libre, que son instituciones que ya confían en nosotros y ponen sus manos en nuestra tecnología, confían en los vamos a ayudar a escalar en todo lo que refiere a activos digitales y blockchain.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to John from Bank Social. I understand that Bank Social also uses an MPC infrastructure. But I think you approach your product and your clients in a very different way. If you can give a little bit of insight, building from what Serena said, in maybe some of the differences of contextualizing.
So coming from the space, my co-founder, sorry, this is screwing me up. My co-founder is a former financial institution CEO. Our head of sales, on our board, we have, from the largest crypto companies in the world to the largest banks in the world. And so when we took a look at how this new financial paradigm could be deployed, we had to look at it from a perspective of bringing new technology along with the existing risk modeling, with the existing risk posturing, and improving that existing risk posturing. And we work with the Secret Service, we work with the we work with all types of countries in Latin America and their governments. We work with banks like BNY, USAA, BOK Financial. And what we started to understand was that purely a multi-party compute or purely a 100% DeFi ecosystem provided additional risks in certain areas. Certainly the trading of things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, we do all that, but we took a different approach, for example, to liquidity markets, international liquidity markets. So, we've got a solution, just as an example, where we can create a marketplace for banks to create liquidity pairs, or essentially create, in your case, it would be creating a Boliviano pair with a US dollar pair that's backed by, not by a DeFi token that is that can be stolen, that can be moved to another chain, for all the protections that all of these systems provide, even banking systems. A lot of banks in here. How many of your banks have never had customers impacted by fraud? Nobody's raising their hand because it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to take those mechanisms that we have now, and we wanted to create that better posturing on top of them. And so just as an example, this liquidity model, instead of using an open token that can then be used on the market, it's backed by what are called for benefit of accounts in the United States. They are still tokenized. They are still self-custody. The person has full control and provenance over their money, but it's backed by a dollar that cannot be stolen out of a wallet, can be given interest, can be recovered in the event that it's moved to another wallet. These types of things that's why when I'm in the earlier panel where I was saying, as a regulator, as a bank, you have to be careful about going in and putting in a lot of these words that maybe right now are relevant, but in a year may not be relevant. One example I'll give you is the idea of proof of reserves. I was talking with these gentlemen over here, proof of reserves, to go out, what bank right now would go tell everybody in the world what account numbers had how much money and what the positions of were those accounts? Don't raise your hand if you would, because you shouldn't be doing that. Well, this is a concept that I think we've heard here in this room 3 or 4 times that things like proof of reserves should be part of these regulatory structures. I would just challenge ourselves to question that. Look at the existing banking paradigm. Would you do that in your current bank? Okay, then maybe think about why you shouldn't do it moving forward. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't innovate and build these new resilient systems, because I can tell you that with the liquidity market system we've created, we've reduced fraud. I like to say this all the time. You guys probably have the same thing every year when your executive team gets together, when your bank team gets together, you have a line on there that says fraud, and it probably says something like 25%. And you all just look at it and you say, yeah, that looks about right. We're going to lose 25% of our money to fraud every year. How do we start to bring that down? And so when we look at these new systems and we look at the capabilities of what these new systems can provide, we are making tangible impacts to those fraud systems. For example, the ability, I think AI hasn't been brought up enough here. If you're going to be employing systems that move money faster, you need to be employing systems that check what's happening faster. And that sometimes can't be humans. And so we've really taken a holistic approach to delivering experiences and tooling that take best in breed approaches that have existed in banks for 20, 30 years. Taking best in class approaches, risk models that have been existing in banks and financial institutions for the last decades, 50 years probably, and we've applied new tooling on top of them so that we take that 25% line item that you're signing off every year and we turn that into 20% next year, and we turn that into 15% the following year. And these aren't theories. These are not theories. These are not things that we're thinking about and we think will work. These are actually working right now. I can go into a lot of other examples, but I'll let some other people talk right now.
I just told Marco that I'll give him a little bit more time after, because I want to dive into you two. Being focused in what I see, different parts of custody from different angles, right? Fireblocks being this trusted counterpart for custody, but you don't take the customer's funds. You facilitate the security of those funds. And Bank Social facilitates security of those funds and has a counterpart, I heard you say a counterpart bank account in the United States, but that's still part of a bank. So I'm a little confused, and maybe we can clarify the distinction.
So technically we do both. We do MPC. Instead of we invented a system, it's patent pending, where instead of deploying the key pieces, multi-party compute, what that means is that you take a piece of information and you split it up into a lot of different pieces, and then you distribute those pieces to people that hold them, helpers. But the helpers cannot take that one piece, and they can't even go to the next person and take that piece, and the next person and take that piece, because there's a bunch of different layers of encryption. The difference that we've done with our DeFi product is that our multi-party compute system, the pieces sit with the banks. So this is a new type of digital deposit box. If you're familiar with the deposit box that you used to put it in there and you have the key, this is a new type of digital deposit box where the consumer, the end user, has full control, full access, and nobody else can come in. Now, what we've done on top of that, Tristan, is we've also understood the need for robustness in liquidity markets when big dollars are being used and they need to remain robust, secure. We need to eliminate or reduce the vast amount of risk on that. And so in those cases where we're providing interest, where we're providing that guaranteed security of that underlying asset, specifically the dollar, we do have a regulated mechanism in the United States called the FBO, the for benefit of account, where we can balance having self-custody of the asset when it's a USDT, a USDC, but also holding that dollar that's backing it in a United States institution that somebody knows without a doubt. And I think the Genius bill is about to come out. And that's really, we've been working with regulators and legislators for the last 2 years on this, but that's really the difference is we do have the MPC, we distribute, and banks can get involved in this now. We actually offer banks, they pay, the people who pay to have their MPC wallet held, the banks make a fraction of that money. So these are also new revenue sources. I think there are ways for banks to get involved in a way that provides new revenue sources to those banks by being those trusted, regulated intermediaries that can be, to a degree more resilient, right? Because you have to look at that too. When you're putting key pieces into companies versus banks, like in the United States, we take one person's wallet and we split it up over 20 banks. The likelihood, and then we only need about 8 of those or 9 of those pieces to come back so that we can reconstitute the key. The mathematical likelihood that those 15 banks will fail is statistically insignificant, meaning it's not going to happen. Never has happened. If it does happen, you have a bigger problem than your crypto if that many banks fail. So, the whole idea here is to rethink the system in a way that leverages the security. This is why I'm a big proponent of these systems being utilized within the regulatory bodies of exchanges and banks and credit unions or cooperatives, because they provide that resiliency of a not just a financial place to put your money, but of a network that can actually be leveraged in a decentralized way to create a whole new financial paradigm.
I'll come back to you in a second. I want to take one point that you mentioned of interest on your cryptocurrency. And I know that what you had mentioned is earning interest. What Evergreen DeFi does is figures out how to earn interest, to make interest on just having cryptocurrency. But is it still the self-custody? Is it still safe? And how do you do that? I know that you have a couple of slides that you want to show. We can put them up.
Bueno, excelente pregunta, sí. Y para relacionarnos un poquito más con lo que DeFi es, ¿verdad? Que se traduce a finanzas descentralizadas, que permite utilizar servicios financieros tales como transacciones. Bueno, ¿sí pueden ver? Sí, perfecto. Préstamos e intercambios mediante las aplicaciones en el blockchain, ¿verdad? Todo esto de una manera segura, transparente y sin fronteras. ¿Me ayudan con la siguiente? Perfecto. Ahora, ¿qué se puede hacer en DeFi, verdad? Entonces, se pueden intercambiar activos, se pueden pedir préstamos de los activos utilizando otros como colaterales. Disculpen. Transferir activos entre diferentes blockchains. Y la mejor de todas, que fue lo que se mencionó al comienzo, que es ganar intereses al estacionar sus activos. ¿Qué es esto? Pues se generan los intereses porque están dando liquidez a donde hay demanda, ¿verdad? Entonces, básicamente, se pone a trabajar tu capital y de ello se generan los intereses. No, todavía la que está, perdón, ahí. Perfecto. Y bueno, volvemos al tema, ¿verdad? Que es la autocustodia. ¿Por qué es esto tan importante y bueno de mencionar? Porque todo pasa mientras ustedes tienen el total control de los activos bajo su custodia. No hay intermediarios, ¿verdad? Entonces es punto a punto. Tenemos esto en el dicho en inglés que es trustless. Entonces no tienen que perder o no tienen que confiar en nadie, ¿verdad? Ya que es un punto a punto la transacción que está sucediendo o lo que se está realizando. Y a la vez, bueno, está protegido por lo que es el código del blockchain, ¿verdad? Entonces es sumamente importante que todo esto pasa gracias a la autocustodia o custodia propia.
Entonces, la persona tiene sus activos virtuales.
Correcto.
En su propio billetera, por ejemplo, con Fireblocks o con cualquier. ¿Y contigo invierten? ¿O cómo se funciona como para ganar estos intereses? ¿Tú tomas los activos?
Claro, bueno, en ningún momento vamos a tomar los activos de los clientes, ¿verdad? Porque ellos tienen simplemente el control de todo. Nosotros proveemos la investigación y el análisis para que podamos explicarles o dar qué son las mejores opciones para que puedan generar estos intereses. Exacto. Entonces, básicamente, nunca vamos a tener el control de los activos. Siempre van a estar en su propia custodia y de acuerdo a la información que nosotros proveemos a los clientes y a aprobación de ellos, es posible que se generen estas implementaciones que les van a generar el rendimiento de lo que tienen en sus activos digitales.
Entiendo. Entonces, como una cuenta de interés descentralizado. Ok. ¿Qué tipo de interés?
¿Qué tipo de interés?
Más o menos. ¿Historical?
Podemos verla. Tenemos un gráfico, pero ese es para otra respuesta. Si gustan, puedes continuar otra y siguiente. Ahí, bueno, entonces, en este gráfico en general podemos simplemente ver como a lo largo del tiempo, sin importar si el mercado es alcista o bajista, los clientes pueden generar intereses. Claro, los números específicos van a diferir por la cantidad de inversión que haya hecho el cliente, pero al menos con este gráfico se puede tener una idea clara de que no importa en qué en qué posición esté el mercado, siempre se va a generar una ganancia verde. Que por ahí viene el nombre de la compañía, ¿verdad? Siempre verde, Evergreen, para que los clientes entiendan que siempre hay ganancias positivas.
Impresionante. Entonces pueden adquirir USDT, ahorrar con Fireblocks e invertir contigo. Ok. Bueno, tenemos un buen panel. Quiero continuar un poco más con pagos. Y con pagos uno de los concerns, my Spanglish, one of the concerns is when payments are done, the crypto that is being transferred needs to be clean, like we have already mentioned, right? The banks need to have confidence if they're going to exchange from USDT to Boliviano or USDT to dollar. The bank that is receiving the Boliviano or the dollar needs to have confidence. I'm curious, from the Fireblock side, do you do anything that certifies a confidence, or what do you do? Because I mean, you work with the big banks, right? So what do you do that gives the banks confidence that they're going to receive USDT or USDC or cualquier and change it for a dollar or a euro or eventually Boliviano? How do you do that?
Con Fireblocks cumplimos con todos los estándares regulatorios a nivel internacional. Primeramente, la empresa fue creada por founders que vienen de una empresa de ciberseguridad de Israel, así que siempre la Layer 1 es todo lo que es seguridad. Y también cumplimos con ciertas regulaciones, como lo que son las ISO, los 27001, 27018, 17. También somos SOC Compliance 1 y 2, estamos integrados con Microsoft y con AWS. Y con respecto a la tranquilidad y la seguridad de nosotros, en la plataforma de Fireblocks, nuestros clientes no hacen el trading. Nosotros no estamos dentro de lo que es el flujo del dinero. Nosotros lo que realizamos son las conexiones a los distintos bancos corresponsales, exchanges, para que el cliente pueda tener una conexión directa con ellas y allí ejecute ese tipo de transacciones.
So in my prior projects, we used, like you mentioned, you work with Bancolombia, so we've worked together before. And as they're doing their wallet, right? They have their custody, they have their investments, and then they have their payments. What types of other certifications would they need if they wanted to correspond with other banks, for example? Well, I guess the question would be for Bank Social, right? If there is a mobile wallet, like here in Bolivia, you have Yape or Yo Lo Pago. If they were to add crypto, like in El Salvador, you have crypto and dollars. If Bolivia creates a wallet that's crypto and Boliviano, is it a totally different scheme of compliance, or how would you view that? Obviously not as a Bolivian, but from your perspective and your experience.
I think she said it very well. We see it as an extension of the existing regulations. We see it as a payment. We see it as money movement. The difference is that we also see new capabilities being able to be layered on top of it. Let me give you a very specific example. We utilize Chainalysis. So we work with a number of banks internationally and in the US. And when somebody brings crypto into their account, all that gets screened, right? So where did it come from? We see all the time where, for example, money's being sent to, bad places. I'll just leave it at that. But we have the ability to notify, to screen, to provide far more compliance than you could ever think of with a traditional bank account. When you get money from, if somebody sends money from, BNB to Visa, you can only really see, and you really can't even see where that money came from at BNB. With the blockchain, we're able to, and this is how we're able to work with law enforcement worldwide. And this is how we're able to, provide the type of compliance that makes this a very easy move for financial institutions. Because at the end of the day, when a transaction can come in, you just compare it to a traditional payment, Tristan. When a traditional payment goes out the door, you've lost all visibility of where that money goes, right? The regulators that we're working with around the world, where we're deploying these liquidity solutions and these tokenized dollar accounts, they love the fact that forever and forever and forever, they can see where every single dollar has been, where every single dollar has came from, where every single Bitcoin has came from, right? You want to diversify. I think, a strategy that diversifies in DeFi is a smart strategy. I would also say that probably not putting all your money in one place is also a smart strategy, but having the tools to ensure that whatever you deploy, whether that's a pure DeFi play, whether that's a custodial account in the United States that's backed by dollars but done on crypto rails, or whether that's a Fireblock solution that you implement yourself, you need to be prepared to have that compliance framework in place. I think things like TRM Labs, Chainalysis, Elliptic, there's a ton of them out there. There's tools being built by, like David, types of things that as you're thinking about these new payment systems, don't think about these things as additional complexities. Think about these things as things you couldn't do before that are going to make your financial institution so much more resilient than it was yesterday.
Beautiful. The last part is going to be a question for each of the panelists as a closing concept, because each of you have very different approaches to it. But when we're talking about cryptocurrency or digital currency, it's something that you own yourself and you can share your keys for security. And we want to be able to spend our money. That's the point, right? So whether we're doing it with an institutional counterpart like Fireblocks, or whether we're doing it with a US-based counterpart entity like Bank Social, or whether we have our money making interest, how do we do those payments? And can I do it in real time? Is it a second? If I'm Yape, right? Can I make interest? Or if I'm Yape, can I have my own crypto and still pay it any second I want to? Or if I'm Yape and I want to have US bank dollar backed, how can I send those any moment that I want through the same cryptocurrency system? I want you to each respond from your perspectives. We'll start from this side.
Sí, pues claramente al ser autocustodia o custodia propia, sabemos que los activos digitales tienen una liquidez súper alta. Entonces es prácticamente en cuestiones de minutos que si un cliente necesita hacer o sacara dinero de sus cuentas, es posible hacerlo sin necesidad de muchas complicaciones, ya que volviendo al mismo punto a punto, ¿verdad? O sin intermediarios, el dinero no tiene que pasar por muchas aprobaciones, simplemente se hace la solicitud y el cliente pues recibe el dinero que está pidiendo. No hay que tratar con instituciones o personas, se está basando todo en el código del blockchain y con ello, ¿verdad? Pues es más rápido, más seguro y pues reduce los costos también, ¿verdad? Entonces, sí, esa sería la respuesta.
Entonces, sí está disponible. Entonces, si App integran criptomonedas o cualquier, es un ejemplo. Ellos pueden utilizar estas criptomonedas que están ganando intereses y al momento que quieren gastar, pueden enviar.
Puedes solicitar Sí, correcto. Puedes simplemente contactar bueno, el servicio que esté utilizando en este momento nosotros y por ya sea salvar a un negocio de millones de dólares o lo que sea, pues es fácil, ¿verdad? Se especifica, se hace la transacción y por medio de la billetera que se está utilizando, pues reciben el dinero para poder realizar lo que ocupen.
Okay. Gracias. Por favor.
Sí, claro, yo voy a venir con un poco más de números, que justo hace poco estuve con el equipo de Payments hablando. Las transacciones generalmente demoran entre 4 y 8 segundos, pero ahora con Fireblocks estamos desarrollando lo que se llama nuestra Payments Engine. Nos dimos cuenta que este año más que nada el foco es en las empresas de Payments. Todas las empresas están interesadas en blockchain porque se dieron cuenta, no quiero ser repetitiva, lo escucharon 1000 veces hoy, pero lo eficiente que es, lo veloz que es, los precios son mucho más competitivos y entonces estamos trabajando para reducir eso a menos de un segundo para que todas nuestras empresas de payments lo puedan realizar. Y otro tema que no he mencionado, nosotros tenemos algo que se llama la Fireblocks Network y todos los clientes institucionales, que hoy en día son más de 2.400, ellos pueden realizarse transferencias dentro de la plataforma de Fireblocks. ¿Qué quiere decir? Dentro de un ecosistema seguro. Entonces, yo soy un banco de aquí, Bolivia, y quiero realizar una transacción con BNY Mellon, con un banco en Europa, con un banco en Asia que ya es cliente nuestro, lo pueden realizar de manera instantánea. Es decir, se pueden conectar con cualquier miembro de nuestro ecosistema. Creo que eso es muy valioso y de vuelta de una manera segura, rápida y no hay margen de error ya que las direcciones ya están blanqueadas también.
I was going to show you guys one of our banks that we've implemented in. So the approach that we take is we try to give the financial institution the full visibility, access control, and security compliance so that the move from real dollars or real Bolivianos to these assets is not only instant and not only safe and secure, but it's also compliant and risk is evaluated in real time. And so we really take a layered approach, Tristan. And by layered approach, we look at something where, and I think very similar to what you guys do at Fireblocks, where you can set transaction thresholds, right, at $10,000. And then those may require different actions to be performed or different things to be performed. But really at the end of the day, and we talked about it a little bit earlier today, the on-ramp, off-ramp solve to make that as seamless as possible. That's why we built what we built, is because we put that right in the banking app. It's connected right to the underlying fiat currency. And we put all those mechanisms and controls in place, visual controls, AI controls, blockchain controls, right? There's ways to put things in smart contracts and make them dual sign. All these approaches are layered in one platform so that the user doesn't have to really think about, do I need to go here? Do I need to go here? Do I need to stake here? Do I need to unstake here? They just have a button in their app. They push the button. I actually became the first person in the world, I believe, to fund a transaction, to fund a bank account, open a brand new bank account and fund it with cryptocurrency immediately, instantly, right into the bank account. No intermediaries that were outside, directly with the bank. And so these are the types of upgrades to the system that we're starting to see come out of people like Fireblocks, people like Evergreen DeFi, where these systems can be safely, securely, compliantly, regulatably embedded into, I don't even know if that was a real word, by the way. There may not be a Spanish translation for regulatability, but there may be, okay? But at the end of the day, that's what we're all looking for here. We're looking for a way to upgrade the system without creating undue stress and undue risk on it across the board.
I do kind of want to keep going, but it has been a long day for me, probably for you. I really want to thank all of the panelists. I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank Cecilia for the incredible effort that she has done putting this together. Thank you so much.
Aló. Thank you, Tristan, for the acknowledgement and for all the help. Thank you for being the person responsible of gathering this amazing set of panelists and speakers that we had today. Please give it a hand to Tristan that managed to get all of these unbelievable professionals to speak to a Bolivian crowd that it is eager to learn and to apply what we have learned today. Thank you to every single panelist that we have right now in the room. Thank you for coming to Bolivia in such a special moment of our history and to be able to provide a little bit of your knowledge and expertise in order to help us improve the situation that we're going through right now. Thank you very much. Please give another round of applause to every single panelist and speaker we had today, in person and online. Thank you very much. Y finalmente, a nombre de las compañías organizadoras, quiero dar unas cuantas palabras de cierre, esta vez en español, porque creo que es muy importante que como audiencia boliviana entendamos después de la jornada que hemos tenido la importancia de encarar una revolución digital con la responsabilidad que esto conlleva. Hoy Bolivia es una hoja en blanco que nos permite crear, soñar y diseñar algo en lo que los bolivianos somos especialistas, pues he tenido la suerte de trabajar con muchos emprendedores y empresas de mi país a lo largo de mi carrera corporativa dentro del mundo financiero y tengo que decirles que no he conocido empresario, emprendedor y persona más creativa que un boliviano cuando tiene que enfrentar una situación compleja. Y las circunstancias actuales no son la diferencia. Después de esta jornada tenemos mayores y mejores herramientas para poder enfrentar esta hoja en blanco que nos permita diseñar la mejor regulación y la mejor propuesta hecha por bolivianos y para bolivianos, con el input de todas las maravillosas mentes que en el mundo ya han atravesado este camino y nos pueden compartir sus mejores prácticas. Muchas gracias a todos y cada uno de ustedes, participantes, invitados, asistentes, por darse el tiempo de participar en estas conversaciones tan importantes para nuestro país y para todas y cada una de sus entidades y asociaciones. Muchas gracias. Un aplauso para ustedes también por estar acá.
Agradecidos por las palabras. A continuación, tendremos las palabras de circunstancia y cierre del evento a cargo del diputado Gustavo Adolfo Aliaga, en representación del Comité de Ciencia y Tecnología. Claro que sí, al finalizar el evento, por favor.
Es costumbre boliviana después de echar un poco de cerveza a los participantes. Bienvenidos. Gracias por estar aquí. Este es un tema que en el Congreso y en este Congreso nuevo que tiene aproximadamente 8 meses, 2 años básicamente, es un edificio nuevo, podemos hablar de estos temas. Generalmente es mucha política partidaria, mucha política y mucha política. En aproximadamente 6 meses hemos podido hacer la ley de inteligencia artificial, cosa que ya la hemos preparado, ya la hemos presentado. Estamos peleando para que en unos días más se abran los cielos de Bolivia y podamos, que la gente pueda comprar satélites, no vivir del satélite este que tenemos chino que funciona cuando se le ocurre y no funciona a veces. Vamos a estar trabajando en estos días con los temas que ustedes han hablado. Pero he preparado unas palabras porque no quiero que se olviden de esta tarea de venir a Bolivia. Toda esta huelga que hemos preparado era para que ustedes sepan que estamos viviendo un momento muy difícil del país. Así que quiero recordarle a los invitados, amigos, lo que está viviendo este país. Hace 40 años, aproximadamente en 1983, don Hernán Siles Suazo, el presidente de la democracia, tenía 24 años en esa época, perdía el control total. La inflación se había adueñado del país y habíamos llegado básicamente a una inflación de más del 1.000.000%. Técnicamente, esa inflación escaló a 11.749.64. No habían reservas en Bolivia, no había plata en el Banco Central como hoy día nos está pasando. Se ha vendido casi toda la totalidad del oro físico y estamos, hasta el día de hoy no sabemos cuántas reservas tenemos. Esperamos que, yo estoy en la Comisión de Planificación, le había pedido al presidente de Planificación que en este presupuesto debería conocer el próximo gobierno que está llegando, pero se ha vuelto secreto de Estado. Y ahora se menciona que lo único que debemos hacer es aprobar créditos y más créditos, más de 3.800 millones de dólares en créditos que no han llegado al lugar que deben llegar. Así que quiero saludarlos y hacerles recuerdo, leyendo cosas de ustedes, leyendo lo que están haciendo. Bernard Liethager, economista y autor de un libro muy famoso que se llama El futuro del dinero, habla que tenemos que pasar de una monocultura del dinero a un ecosistema monetario. El contexto económico y político por el que vive el país no permite a esta Asamblea Legislativa encontrar consensos. Entonces, lo único que ha quedado, como no sé si ustedes conocen Bolivia, una bajada dice, es mejor tener un seguro y no necesitarlo que necesitarlo y no tenerlo. Tomamos la decisión en la comisión que vamos a aprobar todas las leyes en la comisión para dejar como herencia al próximo gobierno todos estos temas. Si no lo hacemos ahora, la construcción en un gobierno que llega recién va a ser muy difícil, porque nadie entiende esto todavía. Cuando te escucho hablar de los precios de las regulaciones, o si con mi teléfono puedo hacer el blockchain, todavía sigue siendo un misterio para mucha gente. Lo es para el presidente Milei, que si no hubiera habido el señor Trump, no hubiera parado los 200 o los 380 millones de dólares de este buen señor que se acuerdan del caso Libra. Ah, bueno, si el señor Milei no conocía de que por haber promovido de que la gente vaya a comprar, los argentinos vayan, son 75.000 argentinos que han comprado, en el caso Libra, la cantidad de 280 millones de dólares, que en un momento desaparece en la noche y obviamente todos culparon al presidente Milei por qué lo había hecho. El presidente Trump ha parado, la justicia lo ha parado, esos que son ahora 390 millones de dólares y 75.000 inversionistas. Esto le ha pasado a un señor que conoce de economía bien, más nosotros que estamos queriendo trabajar en estos temas y que no conocemos absolutamente nada. Entonces, sobre el tema de blockchain, se construyen soluciones de identidad digital soberana, donde los datos pertenecen al usuario y este solo comparte con terceros aquellos datos imprescindibles para realizar determinadas transacciones. Por último, la capacidad de programación de las plataformas blockchain más avanzadas con los denominados smart contract permite tokenizar. Yo me acuerdo ahora que no hablaba, se ha vuelto en Bolivia, se habla mucho de que uno puede pagar, yo técnicamente el 70% de los pagos ya no los realizo con billetes, saco el teléfono y pago con el famoso QR. que es una maravilla. Si esto va así, como en el Japón, yo casi ya no veía moneda japonesa, nos está pasando que estamos viajando rápidamente a desplazar la moneda y utilizar una moneda electrónica. Esta posibilidad de crear dinero programable, es decir, poder enviar dinero a alguien para que sea utilizado con un fin determinado, es hoy día una realidad. Recordaba lo que me decía mi profesor en la Academia Diplomática Argentina, que hemos pasado desde la Revolución Industrial hasta nuestros días 248 años, siglo XIX, siglo XX. Desde 1760, los avances tecnológicos han transformado la sociedad, básicamente entrando hoy día a una cuarta revolución, y esta cuarta revolución solamente ha tardado 35 años. Vamos a pasar de la computadora digital a la computadora que técnicamente decía Google. Hemos hecho una ecuación que nos hubiera tomado 1000 años hacerla. Y esta creación de la computadora cuántica nos ha tomado 3 minutos con 20 segundos. La velocidad es exponencial. Además, en todo el mundo, porque aquí ya nadie se puede escapar. Bolivia ha estado inmerso en estos días. ¿Cómo pagamos nuestra deuda? Desde comprar petróleo afuera o juntar los dólares o tokenizar o comprar cripto. Y ha sido un misterio para mucha gente hasta el día de hoy. Entonces, no nos ha quedado más que sacar las monedas de la abuela y comprar en Paraguay, en Venezuela, en el Perú. Y ahora estamos culpando al mar de que no llegue el petróleo porque la marea está alta. Tenemos problemas de no entender todavía en un país, como le pasó a don Hernán Siles Suazo y como le pasó en algún momento en este famoso libro que les recomiendo que lo puedan leer, de Adam Ferguson, cuando muere el dinero. ¿Se acuerdan? En la República de Weimar, la inflación en el centro de Europa. Cuando la moneda desaparece, todo desaparece. Pero la ideología es este veneno terrible que termina matando todo, toda la estructura. Bolivia se ha gastado 70.000 millones de dólares de su mejor periodo, 70.000 millones de dólares. Tendríamos que hacer un libro parecido al de Adam Ferguson. ¿Por qué gastamos y por qué nos rifamos 70.000 millones de dólares en 13 años y 2 meses? Y que hoy día no nos queda ni una moneda, ni siquiera en la cartera del abuelo. La ideología mata el proceso que tanto le había costado a don Hernán Siles Suazo el año 83 de devolverle la democracia, más de 40 años en democracia estable. Y hoy día estamos entrando a uno de los periodos, y ustedes son testigos de ese periodo, que si no hay estabilidad en las calles, estamos a punto de que la propia democracia termine muriendo. Así que tenemos que hacer esta tarea. Yo sé que esto es muy difícil. Cuando me decía, Gustavo, ¿pero por qué estás hablando de estos temas? Estos temas no son importantes. Los que tenemos que hablar son otros temas políticos. Hoy día nos vamos a dedicar hasta finales de noviembre, hasta nuestro último día, a hacer todas las leyes que hablen de este tema. Tenemos que conocer, yo sé que son pocas personas, soy el único diputado conjuntamente con la presidenta de esta comisión que habla de estos temas. Que me parece una maravilla hablar de estos temas, pero tenemos que dejar un antecedente para que el próximo año podamos avanzar mucho más rápido. ¿Por qué no tenemos la ley de inteligencia artificial? Porque nadie nos ha dado bola. Hemos entregado la ley, lo he explicado a los periodistas, pero no es importante, ¿no? Y qué hablar de otros temas que son básicamente financieros, que son muy complicados. Solamente algunas personas las entienden. El día de mañana la moneda va a ser mucho más fácil manejarla para todo el mundo. Así que les agradezco haber venido. Espero que podamos realizar otra y otras hasta finales de noviembre. Bienvenido a Bolivia. Este es un país que uno llega y dice, qué altura, qué terrible, ¿cómo puede vivir la gente aquí? Pero cuando se va yendo al aeropuerto, uno es que me quiero quedar en Bolivia, uno empieza a extrañar Bolivia. Este es un país magnífico, con muy poca gente y en un territorio muy grande. Así que esperemos, y nuevamente les digo, bienvenido, estamos aquí, vamos a tratar de avanzar lo que queda pendiente de las cosas que tenemos que hacer sobre este asunto. Mil gracias, y les pido sacar una fotografía porque quiero mostrar a mis hijos que fue posible traerlos a ustedes aquí. Nadie me va a creer que había tanta gente en un tema, porque todos hacen política, ¿no? De los 11 millones creo que todos hacen política. Así que mil gracias y bienvenidos a nuestros amigos argentinos, americanos, creo que hay peruanos, ecuatorianos, bolivianos, y me quedo con la última palabra de Cecilia. Cecilia, ¿no? Cecilia, me quedo con tu palabra. Me quedo con tu palabra. Bolivia es una hoja en blanco. Solamente que hay veces hacemos gravatos a los costados, ¿no? Entonces, esos gravatos los tenemos que volver a borrar. Estamos activos en hacer la regulación. Voy a dejar esto. Y con la presidenta vamos a dejar la tarea en el Congreso, porque tú sabes que si esto no se apruebe aquí, no vamos a poder avanzar. Entonces, es mejor tener los antecedentes y los proyectos, como esta cosa de Credinfor. Es mejor tener un seguro y no necesitarlo, que no tenerlo y necesitarlo. Gracias y buenas noches. Voy a mojarlos todos con cerveza.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a las palabras del diputado. Hemos llegado a la final de esta jornada. Queremos agradecer profundamente su participación de cada uno de ustedes, de los organizadores, los panelistas, los moderadores. Sus contribuciones han enriquecido el diálogo y han hecho posible este encuentro, un espacio plural, propositivo y visionario. En nombre de la organización, gracias por acompañarnos y les deseamos un excelente retorno. Muchas gracias, buenas noches y por favor podamos bajar a tomarnos una fotografía oficial. Gracias.
Y en el estilo clásico de boliviano, vamos en pocos minutos al Parlamento para continuar la conversación con cócteles. Están invitados todos.
El medio digital que te informa, blockchain y criptos a toda hora. Desarrollamos comunidad.